Welcome to a special edition of COS Live. We are standing by right now expecting the Wisconsin Assembly Committee on Constitution and Ethics to consider our Article 5 resolution. It's going to be under consideration any minute now. So our resolution, the Convention of States resolution, has passed in 15 states, calling for a convention for the purpose of amending the Constitution. And the amendment areas that our resolution is seeking to gain are fiscal restraints upon the federal government, term limits for elected officials, and restraints on the jurisdiction of the federal government. Now, as I said before, our resolution has passed in 15 states. Right now, we are about to go to a hearing in Wisconsin, and hopefully Wisconsin can be the 16th state. Our chief sponsor in the Wisconsin Assembly is Dan Knodel. Now, as you might know, we need a sponsor for our resolution to be introduced into the Assembly, and Dan Knodel is our lead sponsor. Today in this hearing, you can expect to hear testimony from Kathy Briner. She is a Wisconsin state senator, and we can expect to hear very energetic testimony from her in favor of our COS resolution. We are also expecting to hear COS President Mark Meckler speaking today. He has made himself available to answer questions that the legislators ask him. So he will be on the ground. He is in the Assembly right now. So we can expect to hear questions directed towards him. We will also be able to hear testimony from citizens. Wisconsinites are going to be in the Assembly offering testimony, and this is one of the more powerful parts of these committee hearings, because you get to hear from the people who are on the ground. You get to hear from the people who are the driving force of this movement. As you may know, our resolution starts in the state legislatures, which means it has the driving force of the people behind it. So it is very important that we hear from Wisconsinites, that we hear their testimony. So we'll be able to hear that today. And as you may know, the COS resolution passed last year in the Wisconsin Assembly, and it was an overwhelming victory. We had 60 to 38 in favor of the COS resolution, and it moved from the Wisconsin Assembly over to the Senate. Now it needed to pass both chambers, but unfortunately COVID interrupted our ability to pass in the Wisconsin Senate last year. We had gotten through one committee hearing and then were slated to go to a full Senate vote on the floor, but unfortunately COVID just really put the kibosh on that. But you know what? The on the ground team in Wisconsin, they were not discouraged at all. They continued with their momentum, with their grassroots activism. They rallied, and we have seen amazing momentum coming from the Wisconsin team in 2021. And so we are so excited to see this hearing. Now, this hearing is very important. This is the first step to getting the COS resolution to limit the size, scope, and jurisdiction of the federal government passed. If it passes this committee, it'll then go to a full Assembly vote. Now there are 9 members of this committee, so we need 5 yay votes. If we are able to gain 5 yay votes, that will then trigger a full floor vote on the Assembly. So again, we need 5 yes votes today in the Committee for Constitution and Ethics. So we can expect to see that today in just a little bit. We're going to go live to that hearing in just a few moments. Make sure, though, that you tune in after the hearing, because we are going to have live reaction. We are going to have experts. We are going to have some people come on to talk about what was debated. We're going to separate the facts, the myth. We are going to talk about how the COS resolution is so imperative to really fixing a lot of the problems that we are seeing come out of the federal government. And of course, we're going to have an on-the-ground report from people from Wisconsin. It's going to be very exciting recap that you're not going to want to miss. So as we get ready to see the hearing, remember that this is important right now, this hearing, because this is going to be the catalyst for us to get Wisconsin to pass the CRS resolution, to be the 16th state to pass the COS resolution. It takes 34 states to call a convention. We have passed in 15 states so far. And if we get to 34, that will then trigger a convention of states. And here we are, we're getting ready for the Assembly committee hearing. Again, that is the committee hearing on Constitution and ethics. And here it is beginning.
Yeah, just for this.
Well, there's a couple other bills, but I think we'll start here for this. There's a bunch of virtuals here.
Representative Wickers. Here. Representative Thiesfeld. Representative Allen. Representative Rampton.
Here.
Representative Magnifici.
Here.
Representative Murphy. Here. Representative Hebel is excused. Representative Pope is excused. Representative Cabrera.
They are able to ask questions. You'll first bring up Representative Fiscal and Senator Bernier.
Okay. Well, good morning, Chairman Wickers and committee members. And thank you so much for hearing AJR 9 today. And it's a great day to come into to committee and stand up and speak up for states' rights. And that's what we're doing here today with AJR 9. There may be written testimony handed out to you. I'll refer to that and speak otherwise as well. I did provide a copy of the Constitution, and I'd like to reference that right now at the beginning if I could. And we'll to find Article 5, and that is on page 15 of this particular copy that you have, and I know you all have your own copies in your breast pocket close to your heart. But we'll refer to this one, and you'll find Article 5 there at the top of page 15. And I'm just going to start with a couple of some of the words in that article. And the Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments. That's Congress to the Constitution, or on the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the several states. So that's us, and that's who we're going to focus on today. And 2/3 being 34. Shall call a convention for proposing amendments. And that's very important as well. We're talking about calling a constitution to propose amendments. We're not calling for a constitution to throw out the Constitution and start over. We're talking about a convention for proposing amendments, coming to the table together as states. And then if something would come out of that convention as an amendment, then it would have to go to the states, as any constitutional amendment would have to do, whether it's coming from Congress or from the states, to be ratified by 38 or more states, state legislators. So that's, again, us. It's not the governors of the states. These are the bodies, the houses of the state legislatures. And this is the authority that has been granted to us in the Constitution. And I think it's just high time we exercise a little of the authority that has been granted to us. So that's why we're here today. And if in fact those 38 states would ratify, then that would be the amendment would become part of the Constitution. We celebrated just last year the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment. Senator Bernier will be thrilled about that, and I can't thank Senator Bernier enough. I couldn't be more happy than to have Senator Bernier at my side here as the lead on the Senate side of things. So, in particular, this proposal would would add Wisconsin to 15 other states that have already submitted an Article 5 application. So it comes through our House. Our House is as a resolution, does not need a governor's signature. It's a resolution, but it really is an application to Congress regarding the Convention of States. And this application would restrict this convention to 3 main points. So we're already setting up parameters of what could be discussed at the convention. One being imposing fiscal restraints on the federal government. Here in Wisconsin, we have already done a balanced budget amendment application a number of years ago, which I was leading on as well. Second would be limiting the power and jurisdiction of the federal government. And many of us here, I think, are of the opinion that the federal government has simply grown too large and unwieldy and, well, is off the rails. And then limiting terms in office for federal officials and members of Congress. So those are the parameters and on the application. We first introduced this resolution less than 2 years ago. It was about a year ago that it was passed through the state assembly and then stalled in the Senate with them missing their final floor date. At that time, just 2 years ago, our national debt stood at $22.5 trillion. Already a very alarming figure. Today, just 2 years later, the federal debt is nearly $28 trillion and certain to grow very soon. It's alarming, and it should be a concern to all of us. While our founders gave us a remarkably durable Constitution, over time, we have experienced the federal government and the administrative state creep into every corner of our lives. And it's time we reassert the rights that we have as a state and reaffirm the age-old tradition of federalism. Proposals such as a balanced budget amendment and federal term limits enjoy broad support and deserve the due diligence that an Article 5 convention would provide. We will hear today a good amount of the fear factor and concerns of what could happen if in fact a convention would be called and come to be. But that's jumping way ahead of the situation. We just need to get to the table and to bring the states together. Thank you for doing the pledge at the beginning of our meeting, Mr. Chairman. The word indivisible is in the pledge, and that's the states. We want to be indivisible as states and come together to discuss these issues. But we need to get to the table first. Quite frankly, I'm amazed that the states haven't made this effort in all these years. The process outlined in Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution requires applications to 34 states, which I mentioned out of the Constitution that is in front of you, to call that convention. And be advised that simply because an item is included within the scope of such a convention does not mean that the convention must ultimately pass that amendment to the states for ratification. Furthermore, any amendments proposed at a convention would require the approval of 38 state legislatures in order to be ratified. And to me, this immediately takes away the fear factor that we're going to hear about today. Because I trust the states. And I trust if something is important enough to come in front of 38 state legislatures, and both houses in all those state legislatures have to pass this, an amendment to ratify, that's good enough for me. And again, trusting the states, it's a very high hurdle that our framers put together. So already the hurdles are very high. The bar is set so high that nothing, unless it was extreme importance to all the states and to our country, would be ratified. Even in those states, even again, I mentioned to us, even if one house declines to ratify, then they're done. So with just a few as 13 states, one house in 13 states would decline to ratify. That would eliminate the process. Going to a balanced budget is not a radical thing to require of our federal government. We are constitutionally required to balance our state budget in Wisconsin along with 49 other states. that either have a similar constitutional or statutory requirement. Our state passed an Article 5 application relating to a balanced budget amendment during the 2017 session. There's two reasons why we need to pass this resolution as well. The first is that all applications for Article 5 conventions must be uniform. So they have to have the same verbiage, they must aggregate. And that's important that all we have these, there are 34 states all pass the same resolution. The second is that the language of the 2017 resolution simply addressed the balanced budget. And we feel that this resolution and application that we entertain those two other areas of term limits and limiting the federal government's powers. So the added language of restraining the power of the federal government in this resolution would allow us to prevent the possibility or reality that has already happened of Washington simply passing along unfunded mandates to states to avoid addressing the true cost of their fiscal irresponsibility. We see it happening as we speak today. H.R. 1 is going on in the Congress, and it would override all of our state election law. So we see here again, the federal government moving to take our authority from us. And so why are we here? If this way that Congress is going and our federal government is going, they're really eliminating our reason for being elected. And that's why it's important that we get to the table and have this convention. With that, Senator Bernier.
Thank you, Representative Knodel. You did an outstanding job, and I am not going to read my testimony word for word. I just want to play off what you had to say, is that the name of our country is the United States of America. It is not Washington, D.C. of America. And I think it is clear to the states, you know, that the federal government has overreached. It took 3 years when George Washington mailed the letter to James Madison and said, you know, we have a problem in Houston, James. You know, the Articles of Confederation, Houston didn't exist then, so I thought you'd find that funny. We have a problem. The Articles of Confederation are not working. We have corruption among judges. We have separate navies. We have all this separateness. So the idea of federalism for the federal government to have very specific directives is clear in the Constitution. We, the people, have allowed our federal government to run out of control for years and years and years. And now we have people who vote in favor of the federal government running our lives, which is draconian to me. But the fact of the matter is, it took 3 years for George Washington, James Madison, and the others to get together and try to pull together an amendment convention. And they wrote one of the greatest documents in the history of the world to govern a nation, a republic, if we can keep it. We are losing our republic. And we, the people, and the states, the 50 states, need to figure out how to pull ourselves together. And it is a challenge. You know, 12 of the 13 states met at convention. One state boycotted. But it took them quite some time to pull together 12 states, and they're all on the East Coast and, you know, centrally located. And so we have to pull together 50 states, Alaska and Hawaii, and think of the challenges with that. And so I recognize there are challenges. I recognize also that our republic counts on us to fix this problem. Washington, D.C. is out of control when they are trying to tell the states and the people, we the people, every single move that we can make or not make. It is flat out wrong, and it's time for a convention. Thank you. Have you thought about that? I've thought a lot about that. So the same way the states do. Every single state, except for one I understand, can run in the red. We have to balance our budget. We have to prepare for unforeseen circumstances and have an option for that. We're not saying the government cannot borrow to pay for things. We're not saying that the debt service is not a part of the entire budget. But what we're saying is like the state of Wisconsin, when we set a budget, then we stay within that budget. And if we have to amend our budget, we have processes in place to amend it. And the Congress will have to come in and convene to do that. But they need to do their jobs instead of just writing blank checks.
I only would echo, thank you for the final comment there about doing their jobs. And if that's what the case, maybe it means they've got to raise taxes if we're at war, whatever. But they have take that opportunity when it arises. In the meantime, they need to just get more prudent about being fiscally responsible, as we are here in the state of Wisconsin, even with a rainy day fund. So we have dollars put aside for those instances when emergencies could arise. But that fiscal responsibility has left Washington, D.C. a long time ago, and we need to bring it back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for bringing the resolution forward. I can remember years ago going to some conference I was at and seeing this table sitting there and just stopping by and picking up materials, and it was the first time I'd heard of this movement. It was early on in my legislative career. So I'm tempted to make all kinds of speeches right now based on some of the comments that you have made. But I know I'm here to ask questions. It's your turn to give speeches. So I'm going to resist that temptation. So I have kind of a two-part question here for you. And this is one that I honestly don't know the answer to. So it says that it's for limiting the terms in office for federal officials and members of Congress. We hear all of the talk now about packing the court. Would that provision potentially apply to Supreme Court, U.S. Supreme Court?
Yes, the judicial branch would be included in that term limits,
as
well as the bureaucracy.
All right, and so it couldn't be used to pack the court. No, you can't. You don't see any way they could use this to increase the number of judges on the Supreme Court?
So it is vague enough to allow the attendees of the convention to decide what the language in that specific instance would be. So if a proposal would come forward, and trust me, there would be a lot of different proposals that would either be accepted or rejected. And so, yes, anything can be proposed. But the fact of the matter is that it is up to the attendees. Each state gets only one vote. So your East Coast and West Coast don't get more votes than Iowa, Wisconsin, and Indiana. So when those discussions about the language and the specific agencies and the specific branches are discussed, that can be proposed, but likely rejected at the time.
Okay. Then just part two of my question, if I could, Mr. Chair. Going back to where I had started on this, so you could see a potential there, of an amendment to the Constitution coming out to be sent to the states, of course. We need 38 votes from the states to say that Supreme Court justices no no longer serve life terms, but instead say have like a 10-year term like Wisconsin has. So you could see that potentially occurring.
It could be proposed. Well, we include in the language here about limiting things and limiting the federal government. So limiting to me is not growing. In this case, not growing the size of the court. So I think that would be a focus. Is that limiting? I even have, we've had a question about what the definition of a limit, and I have some language put together that we may be bringing forward to expand on that a bit. The key here is to limit and shrink.
All right, thank you.
And then next would be Representative Rantham.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was very impressed with your presentations this morning. I could tell they were not scripted or rehearsed. It was genuine, it was passionate, and I want to thank you for that. Very strong presentation this morning. I was compelled to poke at the Article 5 element that Representative Cano referenced, and I'd like to ask, why do you think there is an or factor in there, where it says that shall propose amendments to this Constitution or on the application? And so I'm not too cryptic why I'm asking. Is the or factor in here to help address a problematic situation, or is it to reinforce the fact that our nation is indivisible and it is of, by, and for the people, it should be anyway, that the condition exists to use when deemed necessary? So again, to clarify why I'm asking, do you think the or is more for problematic like we have in Washington, or is it more to enable what we've always had afforded to us all along, but we just haven't used until hopefully soon? That's my question.
Oh, it's all about George Mason. So it is an or because George Mason wouldn't sign on until they addressed a runaway Congress and a federal government that was out of control, and that they would be the only ones to be able to amend the Constitution. And he held out at the very end to say, we need another way for the states to amend the Constitution if needed. And so George Mason held out for that reason, because he foresaw that our Congress would overreach and the federal government would over control, and that way the states had an option. The only reason, there's been many conventions of states, but none that I specifically call an amendment convention, because usually what happened when the states started rattling their sabers, and then the Congress finally decided that, well, okay, we'll do this, or, you know, whatever the amendment was, we allow those women to vote finally. And so Wyoming actually passed, we're the first state to allow women. We had a woman in Congress before women had the right to vote. Did you know that? So it was the people, the House, the Assembly houses, and the Senates in each state that pushed in order for Congress to finally make some changes. And they may here as well if we come dangerously close to their authority. But I would suggest that even if Congress decides to limit, to have term limits, I still suggest that we have an amendment convention to talk about the various concerns. And if you want to read a book, read Mark Levin's book on amendment convention, or whatever the title might be. This is been a long time coming, since 1787. And I worked with Chris Kapenga, Senator Kapenga, and Senator Craig on the Assembly of State Legislatures. That was the first resolution we passed here in the state. And I think we're seeing more and more interest in this, and I hope I see it very soon.
I'd just like to follow up and thank you for that feedback. It does qualify that or was put in there to prevent or to address rather a problematic situation. So the last statement I'll make, Mr. Chair, is I hear Representative Knodl's comments very clearly. Getting to the table is everything here. Being able to get to a point where we can take our position and have our authority and execute that authority as required by our Constitution, or as allowed for rather, to have subjective questions come up, or what about this and how is that going to work? I don't think that that's relevant at this stage. I think it's let's get this done so we're at the table, then we can frame how we're going to address moving forward. So I really appreciate Representative Knoll making that statement. I wanted to echo it back. That's why I'm very excited about this resolution, and I'm proud to be a co-sponsor. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Follow-up question from Representative Hebel. You said you must budget for unforeseen conditions. How do you budget for unforeseen disasters when you don't know the size or scope of them? If you want to reiterate your first answer.
Well, thank you, Representative Hebel, for the question. Again, when we go to our rainy day fund, we don't know what we might access that for. So it's simply dollars, and we do the same at home. Again, if you're prudent and you put dollars aside, you simply don't know what that emergency is that could come up. And it could be a natural disaster. It could be war. Well, we don't know that. So it's just it's something you do in the process of prudent financial handling. And referencing back to Representative Rantham's comments, there's something else on page 18 that I'd like to point out in our Constitution, and it's called the 10th Amendment, which is directly to states' rights. I'd like to make that relevant again, that we have state rights, and we've dropped the ball, that we haven't exercised this authority that has been granted to us. So this is that step, and again, it's getting to the table, all the concerns that we're going to hear about today. What could happen when we get there? It's just not part of our discussion today. Our discussion today was applying to Congress to call that amendment convention and get the states together, then to have the discussions.
Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Chairman Wickers, and thank you, legislators, for your testimony. Senator Bernier, I think one of the phrases that you used was something like, "We are losing our nation." And I couldn't agree with you more on that, but my question is, why are we losing our nation? And I think we're losing our nation because we're losing our Christian values and our morals, and not because of our Constitution. And I think a lot of times people think that the foundation of our country is the Constitution. I think that we the people are the foundation of our country, and the Constitution stands on we the people. So I'm trying to understand, with that as a backdrop, one of your resolutions here says, one of the whereas clauses says, the federal government has ceased to live under a proper interpretation of the Constitution of the United States. Why would I have any confidence in the fact that if we, as a moral people, are not going to live by the Constitution as it's set out now, that somehow, miraculously, a convention that changes it is going to make people live under those laws, and that they're not going to be circumvented the way that they have been already?
Representative, you have an answer. Go ahead.
Do you want me to answer that?
Yes.
Okay. Well, Dave, Representative Murphy, your concerns are well taken. We are a Judeo-Christian society. Our Constitution was created under those principles in life, that thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not covet, and that sort of thing. And so even though I believe it was James Madison, and I might be wrong, but and I'll paraphrase that if men were angels, we wouldn't need government. The operative word is men. I have to throw a little humor in it because, you know, this is a serious situation, needless to say. But our government, the governments have always biblically been in place. God directs us to follow our government regulations and laws just as are to follow God's laws. And to leave to government what is government. And so the fact of the matter is, you know, we human beings tend to worship false idols. And I believe government at this point in our history has become a false idol. And so I understand your concern with people not following their Christian values or other religious values that make us a better people, and we're relying on government to do it for us, hence all the programs and not the tithing and helping your neighbor out and helping your church out so that they help people in the community. I get all that. But if we are going to help save this republic, we are a country of laws, law and order. And we need to do every attempt we can to bring us back to the law and order and principles that our judiciary branch is required to enforce. And so that is where we're at now. We're trying to set an example morally, but we're also trying to set an example of that this is a country of laws, and the Constitution is the basis of all of our laws. And we need to write those laws that will have less vagueness in them and a little more direction for Congress that will be supported by our judicial branch.
So Senator Bernier, you have worked a lot on the election issue. And I think when I think about this issue here before us today, it reminds me a lot of some of the issues that we've dealt with in elections. Wisconsin has some of the best election laws in the United States, but they weren't followed in the election, and we didn't have any enforcement. And so you end up in the same place with these election laws. I mean, we can go out and try to pass a bunch more election laws, but if the same thing happens and they're not enforced, just like there's no reason to make me think any changes to the Constitution are going to be enforced, you know, where does this take us? I mean, what?
Well, when a specific law, and I know you're thinking probably specifically about the special voting deputies in nursing homes, and there are a number of the legal issues that hadn't been addressed in previous law. And you know, Representative, most of what we do is rewrite law to address issues that pop up that we didn't foresee. And we did not foresee the pandemic, and we weren't prepared for nursing homes to be closed down. And to make a blanket statement that all of the election laws weren't followed, I don't think is extraordinarily fair. I think that that there was, I don't want to say creativity, but there was reaction to what the need was during the pandemic. And had we not had this pandemic, where special voting deputies were not allowed in the into nursing homes, or that massive numbers were mailed out and they needed a place to drop it off because they didn't rely on the United States Postal Service and they were more comfortable dropping it in a drop box. That wouldn't have happened and we wouldn't be here discussing those election laws. But same thing applies. Okay, because of this, we need to address more specific language in a statute. Because the federal government has been abusing their authority, we have to address the Constitution. Same principle.
Sure. Mr. Chairman, could I approach one more question? And that would be, so the language here, we're going into areas that are rather vague. It's balanced budget, it's term limits. So let's say, for instance, they brought an amendment through this convention legalizing marijuana because marijuana revenue would help you balance a budget. I mean, I believe a convention could get out of hand to the extent that they would try to make that connection. And then we go back to the whole idea, well, you know, 3/4 of the states would have to ratify it. I believe 80% of the public out there supports legalizing marijuana. I think it's a bad idea, but I wouldn't want that to happen. And I could see that happening. Something like Citizens United. This starts to get into the realm of term limits, or who's elected, or do we keep the same people in office? Do we want to reverse Citizens United because, or have a constitutional convention that would somehow take away the free speech rights of people that are in the corporate world? Bipartisan redistricting could fall into that realm and say, well, you know, we're going to have better representation if we make sure that there's bipartisan redistricting, because that'll make everything more fair. And even within term limits, you could say, well, what is a term limits? Is it one term? It could be. There's no formal resolution here about what these things say. So if you wanted to say it's one term, it could be one term. I don't even know whether this is a good idea. You know, I serve in Madison. I don't serve in Washington. I see no problem here with term limits. I don't know if my colleagues do either. Is it more of a problem in Washington? Maybe so. But one thing that I do know is that when the elected official turns over on a regular basis, who gets more power?
Well, I think
bureaucrats get more power.
He's not asking us any questions, Mr. Chairman. Should we leave?
I just, if you want to speak to him, because I've opened up the door on all the individual things. So
I have another committee meeting, so though I appreciate your arguments for the executive session, Representative. That same proposal to legalize marijuana is presented in the Assembly and in the Senate unless there is an agreement among two houses and a governor. It will not happen. There will be 75 houses that are going to have to agree on the language that comes out of an amendment convention. Rest assured that most of the people there will make the argument that legalizing marijuana is a statutory argument, not a constitutional argument, that it is to be left to the states to make that argument, or through Congress to make the statutory provisions of that particular issue. The difference between a statutory authority, a statutory language, will clearly be argued at a convention. that that is not a constitutional amendment provision at all. And I trust that out of the 50 states to be present, and trust me, once we get 34, all 50 will be present, that there will be red and there will be blue and there will be purple, and they will all argue about language, and it may take days, if not weeks, to fine tune the language of a constitutional amendment. But it will take 75, and the reason why I say 75 is Nebraska is unicameral, houses to agree with that language. And it won't be about marijuana.
And just before we leave this, I would just say that there are lots of things that have been statutory language that somehow have become a part of the Constitution. And I would bring up abortion as one of those issues. Abortion used to be a statutory consideration, and it's not anymore.
Representative Cabrera.
My colleague across the chamber, I lost count of the number of questions he asked and comments he made, and I think, if we all are going to give an opportunity to speak, then, I'd request the chair to please, limit the questions that, folks are being asked. I just wanted a little bit more clarification, because I think, and maybe Ledge Council can provide that clarification, because I think we started out saying that the convention would be for 3 specific reasons in the application that is listed here. I'm looking at Representative Canoto's letter here, and it says that the application would restrict such a convention to 3 main points, and then you list the 3 points. But then I'm hearing other statements that you're making later saying, let's just convene and decide what to do once we're at the table. So I'm a little, if you could, clarify that as far as, what type of action is being requested, and then, what is there in place to prevent action being taken beyond that scope?
Thank you, Representative, for the question. As I did mention in my testimony that these applications have to aggregate. They have to be the same to get to the 34. So that's part of the framework, setting out these are the 3 subject matters that we have all agreed on that we want to come to convention to discuss. That's it. That's as far as this resolution is, an application to get to that convention. We can have conjecture and all kinds of guessing of what could happen or what avenues people will go down once they're in the discussions, but that's the debate that is had at that point in time. So it's important to follow the Constitution that these 34 states present an application that is consistent and that they aggregate, if that answers your question.
If Ledge Council could please just clarify that once the application is made to state that we will get the 34 states that call the convention, is the action to be taken limited to the 3 things that the 34 states agreed upon, or can they go beyond that? And what is it that is there to prevent that from happening?
Well, there is no, as the bill authors have noted, there is no precedent for a full Article 5 Convention of the States. So we don't have, we don't know exactly how it will work, but there are some points in the process where there might be some limits. For example, after the application of 2/3 of the states, it is Congress that needs to call that convention under the constitutional language. Some scholars have speculated that Congress's call would include some parameters. The convention itself could set forth kind of rules of its own operation that could include substantive, subject matter limitations. And then finally, some states, including Wisconsin, have enacted legislation that limits their delegates from taking action on things outside the scope of a call. In this case, I think that, some of the arguments are that some of the call is subject to interpretation, but within whatever those subject matters identified in the call that our legislation that was passed in 2017 does prohibit a delegate from Wisconsin, at least, from voting on any amendment that's outside that scope.
Thank you.
Representative Ellen.
Thank you. Your testimony, initial testimony, both of which were very inspiring. Thank you for that. I think there's no question that we need leadership in today's world, and you two are exhibiting that leadership by bringing this forward. So thank you. When you bring forward proposals like this, you subject yourself to criticism because, everybody likes things just the way they are. Let's not rock the boat, right? But when things are unsustainable, then we know that change is necessary. So I think there's two fundamental questions that are before us. One is, why is an Article 5 convention necessary? And then two, the operations of it, like how does it work and what's to be considered and so forth and so on. So in contemplating the why it's necessary, I'm wondering if you could speak to the current practice of Congress passing continuing resolutions as opposed to passing a budget, and give some commentary on that.
Okay, so when the convention meets, it is my experience. So we had 36 states at the Assembly of State Legislatures, and we broke up into committees, and kind of like we legislators are accustomed to doing already in every state. My guess is that the committee rules at the beginning will designate certain committees working on certain language of certain things that are in the call. And so whether, currently we have 28 or 29 states already with a balanced budget amendment resolution in Congress. So if we actually hit 34 there, the Congress shall call, and then the process will begin. And I think the legislators in all the states are very accustomed to the committee type process. So I think that is probably how it will carry out. And then in that committee process, they might even break the balanced budget portion down to specific areas that Congress is accustomed to, such as the continuing resolution, and talking about how to deal with that in the proposed constitutional amendment. So with that said, what goes on currently in Congress with our money is what will be discussed in how the Congress has been spending our money and our children's money and our grandchildren's money. And they will break that down to address each and every aspect of that. I'm confident of that. And so it would be different if you threw a bunch of lay people, so to speak, into a room and say, come up with a constitutional amendment. I think it's important that, although there's a lot of individuals that are involved in the Convention of States and a lot of legal beagles in our country that would love to be a part of it, but I think legislators are uniquely positioned to understand the committee process, to understand the legislative process and the policy-making process. And trust me, there will be a lot of lawyers in the room.
And Senator Breer is the logistics and rules expert, so we will refer to her for all those type of things. But going to the first part of your question is that we've simply recognized that Congress is not acting in the best interests of we the people. They just are not and haven't been for a period of time. And so this re-engages us, the state legislators, to engage. We'd likely be the delegates, as Senator Bernier mentioned, and it comes back to us, the people that are closest to the people, to be the ones that will decide on ratifying anything that comes out of the convention. So we're bringing this back to those that are elected that are the closest to the people. And I think we're the ones most in touch, in tune with the people, and can act on their behalf.
Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one last question. So if there's a constitutional convention is called, who's responsible for running it? And then how are they held accountable for any constraints that are being placed on it?
It's not a constitutional convention, but you.
Okay. The amendment convention would elect their own president and vice president, secretary, that sort of thing. There's been, like I said, there's been numerous conventions of the states that have followed specific criteria in the leadership parameters, and so that will be that will be the first thing they do, and then they will pretty much set up the structure. Like I said, we're very accustomed to working in the committee process, and that's all handled among the members and the attendees. Now remember, each state can take, send as many as they want for the most part. I think the state of Wisconsin set up 10 people. If you get too many, I think probably they will never get to how that state is supposed to vote in the first place, but maybe. So like I said, there will be plenty of lawyers in the room to talk about, and constitutionalists and all of that, and weighing in order to get to that final vote. It's not done in a vacuum, Representative. It will be done in the wide open with the public and the media and all of that, watching every single thing that goes on. And so I have confidence that they will come up with a process and a procedure to come up with something tangible and something real, rather than something that just won't. I know we talk about it would take 26 votes to get an amendment. It depends on how it's set up. I would argue if it takes 34 resolutions from the states to come to call a convention, I would, if in attendance, would argue that it needs at least 34 votes to get it out of convention, because then you're 4 states away from ratification. If it has less than 34, when there's 34 states that petitioned, it's a go nowhere proposition.
And the accountability goes back sort of to enforcement. I've had such an issue in the last year with laws not being enforced, and so this sort of goes back to that, and that's why I bring it up.
Yeah. Well, the separate branch of government, don't you know, we're supposed to make the laws and enforce the laws, Representative?
And finally, to that, Representative Murphy, even in our delegates will have constraints placed upon them, including recalling them. So if they would step outside those constraints, we can recall them and replace them.
Representative Thiesfeld and then Representative Rantham.
It's just a short question. Maybe it has a long answer, but when applications have been made, they can be made in different ways. Okay, this is a method that has not been used successfully before in United States history, and so do you know how many states have proposed this already? Maybe you said it earlier and I missed it.
15.
It's 15. Okay, so now it seems to be somewhat of an open constitutional question. I don't know if you know more about this or not. Can that number fluctuate? can a state pull back later on? And then, or vice versa. The state said no and then join in later on. So is that a possibility?
Yeah, a state certainly could rescind that application and bring it back. Once it's there, it will stay indefinitely, but the states certainly have every right to rescind.
Okay.
And I suppose could reapply.
Yes, yes. As a matter of fact, that has happened with the balanced budget amendment. Specifically, I think also there are some legislatures that have written an expiration date to their petition as well, which has then automatically been rescinded. You know, Congress, before the Assembly of State Legislatures started seriously looking at a amendment convention, we found out that Congress wasn't even tracking our petitions. They didn't even know what they had or how many they had. And so through the efforts of the Assembly of State Legislatures, we actually got, I believe it was a congressman from Indiana, but don't quote me on that. A congressman got to work and worked with the House clerks and whoever they needed to work with to actually find them all, count them all, and determine how many petitions they actually had. So currently, the balanced budget amendment petition at one time had 30. I think it's down to 28 or 29 because of either they rescinded it or they put an expiration on it.
Okay, then I guess part B of that would be, I see on here that it's labeled in the resolved as a continuing application. So there's no closure date here.
Correct.
This could just go on, I mean.
Congress has to keep track of it.
27th Amendment initially came out with the Bill of Rights, and it wasn't until 1992 that it was actually ratified as an amendment. So this application is open for as long as there's a United States of America. States could be jumping in and jumping out and so forth. Okay, that answers my question. Thank you.
Oh, yay.
Okay, we're done here.
That fire. Also, I would like to make the comment responding to Representative Cabrera's request. I've allowed a little leeway to think out loud, discuss. This issue's been coming for a long time, and there are questions, there are feelings with this. So I've been somewhat liberal to open this up. So I'm asking those who are testifying that if there's repetitive questions, comments, if you could keep them brief, concise, and then the same with the committee members, that if you have a question, keep it concise. If you have a comment that's already been discussed. Keep it concise. Thank you.
Okay. My name is David Serta. I live on County Road W in Sheldsburg, Wisconsin. It's in the United States Marine Corps from 65 to 69, in Vietnam, 66 and 67. During our working careers, my wife and I bought and paid off a dairy farm in Sheldsburg. In retirement, rental from that farm was to help supplement our income. Then County Road W needed to be replaced. The state needed federal money. To comply with the strings attached to that federal money, I had to surrender several acres to the state. Of course, I was paid the current price for those acres, but not the 20 or 30 years of rent. The strings were written by a bureaucrat in Washington, D.C. The state hired road engineer, the county highway department, my state senator and representative all agreed that taking my land was not necessary to ensure the quality and safety of the road. However, none had the authority to do anything about it. The authority to accept or modify the strings attached to federal money belongs here with the people familiar with everything Wisconsin, not in Washington, D.C. I'm a combat veteran. I've been in firefights. I know fear. Please do not let fear of doing something in this political climate paralyze you to do nothing. You have the power of the Constitution, the power of your constituents, and the power of history to stand up and reestablish the sovereignty of this great state against an overbearing federal government. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Dan Gumbert. I'm from Elk Mound, E7674 North County Road, Elk Mound, Wisconsin. I'm a 20-year Air Force vet. I am retired from the Air Force. I'm also retired from the Fort Snelling National Cemetery as a burying vet. I buried about 25 to 30,000 vets. I'm sorry. Yeah, 25 to 30,000 during the time I was there. We bury 5,000 a year. I'm a foster parent, foster treatment center. I've done 12 children, bought a house for $100 and rebuilt it myself. So I do everything that most people don't want to do. Best way to describe me. I did foster parenting. Some problems we had with foster parenting was children, bunch of children I got that came to me didn't even know how to read and write. They were 10 and 11 years old. I had to put them in 5th and 6th grade. The school helped out as best they could. They couldn't do anything because they weren't deficient in any mental capacity or that. So we did that. I did a second child where he aged out of the system. He never finished school. The average kid in the United States leaves home at 27 years old. He was 18 years old. Basically had to be put on the street. Basically, I've been going around the state talking to people. I do gun shows. I do Northern Wisconsin State Fair. I do a lot of things. I do a lot of events. First year, I signed on 1,200 people and did 22 events all around the state. Everybody agrees there's something wrong. We need to get something done. Don't be afraid of doing something. This is just calling the states together to talk. We need to have them talk. And the Constitution is 230 years old. The average Constitution in the world is 17 years old. It's a document we need to protect, and I think the veterans will protect it no matter what. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, and thank you both for your service. I would like to let you know that next on the bucket list, you can run for office, because that's another job that nobody wants to do.
Actually, I'm an introvert, and this I'm uncomfortable with it, but I do the best I can. I feel dedicated to this. And, you know, we got 32,000 people signed on in the state of Wisconsin. 2,700 of them are vets.
Thank you, Chairman and distinguished members of this committee. My name is Doug Dorn, and I am here today as a concerned husband, father, United States citizen, Army veteran, son of a veteran, and a taxpayer. A portion of the money I earn every day enables my local, state, and federal government to function. Millions like me fund the greatest nation this world has ever seen. After years of watching people speak boldly on the campaign trail and act weakly once taking office, I searched for a way to truly affect the positive change needs. I stumbled across an organization called Convention of States. Through them, I learned about the power of Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution. Article 5 gives American citizens the power to directly influence the future of our great nation, of the people, by the people, for the people. Article 5 is what our nation needs now. Our federal government is out of control in many ways and so overgrown, our founders would never recognize it. The issue I would like to speak about today is the overreach of our federal government, and here are two of the most egregious examples. First, the Obamacare system and what took place with implementing that. Our monthly health, this is my personal information, my family. Our monthly health care plans or plan premiums have increased from around $200 or $20 per paycheck to $225 per paycheck. Our annual deductibles have increased from around $200 per year to $6,000 per person and $13,000 per family. While the prices go up, the quality of the work or quality of the service has diminished, and we are definitely waiting longer for appointments. This government overreach is little more than redistribution of wealth. The next issue is the Common Core that's been forced into public and parochial schools. Common Core removed classic literature from classrooms and replaced it with diversity, equity, and inclusion dogma. Sophisticated writing by world-class authors and elevated, interesting vocabulary disappeared, replaced by colloquial, dumbed-down language that elevates no one's thinking and repeats the same tired, politically correct dogma in book after book. Common Core also dumbed down math while making it much less fun to learn or teach. My wife's a substitute math teacher. Math facts are now not as important as flexible thinking. Diverse math strategies become the focus, such as 5 different ways to do multiplication and long division. This complicates problem solving and confuses kids by focusing on choosing the right strategy that is right for you, rather than solving problems simply, accurately, and consistently. The right answer is not as important as having choices in how to arrive at an answer. The Chinese, Japanese, South Koreans, and other nations are leaps and bounds ahead of us in math excellence, both in teaching strategy and in sophisticated student outcomes. Thank you all for the opportunity to speak here today.
I'd like to make a correlation to your last statement on the Common Core math, that we're into the category of fatal, mathematically speaking, in our federal budget. And people don't see that because math is a perfect science and they're not following the science. We'll wait for questions after yeah.
Good morning, members of the committee, Chairman Wickers. Thank you. My name is Taylor Renz. I live in Greendale, Wisconsin. Thank you for the opportunity to allow me to testify today. I'm going to keep my remarks short and just focus on one of the main reasons why I strongly support calling an Article 5 Convention of States. I believe some written materials were submitted to the committee, and I think part of what I submitted is a current graph of the M1 money supply that I pulled from the Federal Reserve's website. And I'm not a trained economist, and I'm not competent to testify about the intricacies of money supplies and the measurements of money supplies. However, from just a layperson common sense perspective, this graph shows a fact that most Americans already know to be true, which is that last year, the US created an unprecedented amount of new currency. And the reason most Americans know that so much new currency was created is because nobody's complaining about a drastic increase in federal tax obligations, even though the federal government passed round after round of multi-trillion-dollar stimulus bills. As you all know, state governments must finance their spending in one of three ways: by raising tax revenues, borrowing money, or getting grants from the federal government. The federal government has a fourth mechanism for financing spending, which is just creating new money. And the federal government has always had the federal government's ability to finance large amounts of government spending by creating new money instead of by raising taxes or borrowing gives it a distinct fiscal advantage over the states. And although that fiscal advantage has always existed, it has historically been constrained by inflation concerns. But as the graph that I submitted shows, it now appears that those inflation concerns are much less constraining than they used to be. In my opinion, an Article 5 Convention of States provides the only path to reestablishing somewhat of a balance between the fiscal power of state governments versus the federal government, and that absent such a rebalancing, our system of federalism, and therefore a system of self-government, is likely to fail soon. Thank you again for your time, and I hope you will vote in favor of AJR 9. Thank you.
This doesn't move. I'm tempted to handle every objection, but I'm Joanne Laufenberg from Lake Geneva, and I appreciate your time. After 6 years of talking to Wisconsinites while researching history, the Constitution, and this Article 5 debate, I've come to one conclusion. We need my husband. He will sit through a 2-hour discussion with family, friends, a Bible study or seminar, and crystallize the most important point in one phrase or sentence. It will summarize, clarify, mend fences, and impart wisdom. It's a beautiful gift I don't have. Nevertheless, here's my attempt on his behalf. If we restore the original meaning of the Constitution, reestablish the enumerated powers, and get the federal government to follow the Declaration of Independence by obtaining amendments of the proper kind, we can have a bright future, free of quadrupled health insurance premiums, thought police, medical mandates, mass business closures, power grid failures, hyperinflation, and frightening elections for both sides of the aisle. There will be trials, there's no getting around it in this fallen world, but there will also be seasons of freedom and victory for everyone who works toward it. Every single argument against this convention process has been debunked when examined within factual, historic, and legal context. I'm happy to handle any objection anytime. Most of us can agree that electing good people and refusing to comply with illegal regulations is the right thing to do. However, it is quite simply not enough. We can legally restore freedom and root out all of this destructive dysfunction by using the method the framers of the Constitution designed for state legislators to restrain our out-of-control, unaccountable, runaway, oppressive federal government. We're with you all the way. Lead us into victory. You are our only hope because God gave you the authority to get this done. Thank you.
Representative Murphy, do you have a question?
Well, the gentleman who was talking has already moved on, but The gentleman here was talking before about Obamacare and Common Core. And I would like to say to that gentleman, I couldn't agree with you more. I am more on your side on Obamacare and getting rid of Common Core than you can possibly imagine.
Can we keep it to the?
However, my question would be, do you really think that a convention in Washington, D.C. is going to get rid of those things?
Can I answer that?
Sure.
So amendments, if you look at them, are followed. They tend to be followed for 3 to 4 generations or 100 years. So right now, the federal government can propose an amendment anytime they want. We just want the states to be able to propose amendments. You know, the quote from George Mason was, "No amendments of the proper kind would ever be obtained by the people if the government should become oppressive." So they do follow the Constitution. They follow the 3,000-page annotated Constitution. And when we propose amendments and get them ratified in 38 states, they do follow it. So legally, it does work. It's just that the states and the people need an opportunity to get amendments of the proper kind. There aren't many amendments. I mean, we could, debate amendments that aren't followed, but.
So for the sake of this hearing and the joint resolution as drafted, I think there's a lot of people that agree with virtually everything that you're saying in the principles, but the concern is what might get added in that is not in this language, and how do we get surety that what we're going to be voting on in this committee is what is discussed, and if anything else beyond that is discussed, whether we're for or against is irrelevant. How do we ensure that this goes to be discussed and debated with the contents that we sent in that only?
Yeah, and I have an expert behind me who can answer everything better, but my answer is that all it takes is a point of order to say, look, this is not germane to our application. The reason 34 states have to match in their commissions that are used to call the convention, of which there were 30 when they wrote the Constitution. So we do have legal precedents about how a convention works. We know that it's one state, one vote. We know that you have to stick to the subject listed on the resolutions. We know that the rules are set at the beginning of the convention by the people, by the legislators, delegates, commissioners who are there. That there is legal precedence. You could get the Law of Article 5 by Rob Nadelson, and he has all of the original source material listed in the bibliography. There is also plenty of information out there. The federal courts have even agreed that we know how the Constitution works. I could go into more, but you probably don't want to hear me for 2 hours. And we have somebody who knows a lot better how to explain it than I do.
Any other questions? Hearing no other questions, thank you all for your testimony.
Thank you.
Now calling Reverend Matt Truella, and next would be Joseph Shardle from Sussex, and then after Joseph, testifying together would be Edward Perkins from Appleton, Reverend Wayne Sedlak from West Bend, and Dave Kempen from Appleton. Matt Truella. Matt Truella. Joseph Shardle, is he here?
Yes.
Why don't you go ahead?
Sure.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for allowing me to participate in our constitutionally limited republic. My name that I go by is Citizen King, otherwise known as Joseph Shardle. I reside all across the United States, currently in Sussex, Wisconsin. I would like to make a brief quote and then hopefully an equally brief comment. This is a quote from one of our prior presidents of the United States. Quote, "Government exists to protect us from each other. Where government has gone beyond its limits is in deciding to protect us from ourselves." Deciding to protect us from ourselves, for example, against the coronavirus or helmet laws or seatbelt laws or anything that is, with good intention, designed to protect me from myself. Thank you, but no thank you. And just from a common sense point of view, you know, a couple of guys leaning over the hood of a pickup truck, etc. If my government comes to me and says, we've produced this blue ribbon committee and then we've done the deep dive research and we have found that best practices A, B, and C, I would very much listen to you and I would likely implement it. But if you presume to come to me and tell me that you will wear a mask or you will not go to church or you will take this jab in your arm, you are going to wake up the sleeping giant. And I may be on the forefront of that a little bit, but I'm telling you, there's 200 of my best friends, 200,000 of my best friends with me. And which brings me to the second point, King, Citizen King. If I understand American government correctly, and I may not, the citizen is the highest office in this land. The president and anyone supposedly under him, including you, work for me. You represent me. That's your job. I appreciate that because I don't want to do it. I have created you and I sustain you for that purpose. And you serve at my pleasure. And as long as you are pleasing me, representing me, I'll allow you to stay in that office with my vote, which is in jeopardy, by the way, because we don't enforce already existing laws. That's a project. Get on it. So I'll end soon. All I'm saying is that I think this quote is accurate. Please continue to protect us from each other so we don't rip each other and burn each other down out on the streets. Enforce those laws. There's another group of laws that are not being enforced. Please do that, but don't mandate on me how I am to run my life. I am the sovereign I'm the citizen here. You work for me. Thank you.
Any questions? Is Matt Torella here? No. If you have testified, we'd ask you to leave the hearing room. There is an overflow room in 225 Northwest where you would be able to watch the hearing. But if you have already testified, please leave. As others come in, they're looking for places to sit. All right. So now we have Edward, Wayne, and Dave. Come on forward and you may begin.
Can I give materials to the committee?
If you've already testified?
I have not.
No, if you've already testified, we're asking if you would leave this hearing room and go to the overflow room in 225 Northwest so we can make room for the people who will be speaking next. So we'll have you gentlemen testify. Next on deck will be John Dials, Jackie Dials from McFarland. After them will be Curtis Wool, Dominique from Guanago. You may begin.
My name is Dr. Wayne Sedlak. A little bit about myself. I'm 47 years in the ministry. I'm a graduate school professor. I've taught on 2 continents, the graduate level. 47 years in ministry and missionary work. I have seen just about everything you can imagine in Africa concerning the breakdown of law and order. When constitutions are toyed with, you have to understand, and I'm going to ask all of you 3 questions that I've not heard addressed yet. But I've seen it occur that when historic constitutions, good, bad, or indifferent, have traditional tradition behind them, and they are torn down, the assumption is that the next constitution or the next series of laws will command the same kind of respect. It doesn't happen that way. So I'm going to ask you a few questions. Having seen terrorism up front and close, having held victims of terrorism in my arms, and having been hunted by terrorists in Africa, I understand what happens when law and order breaks down. So I'm very much concerned with the process here in Wisconsin, in my country, my beloved country, and in, of course, other nations where I minister to people and currently do so. I have 3 questions. Number 1, if you can't rein in the current governor of Wisconsin, if an hour after a joint resolution of this state holds him accountable to the Constitution, and an hour later he defies it with a new order, how can you assure me or anyone else that you have the authority to trust a Congress that is packed full of ideologues that are on the same page with that man? And there's no denying it. That's question number 1. I've not heard that addressed yet. I hear a lot about paperwork and experts and putting things on paper. But again, I ask you the first question, because we're talking about the Constitution of the United States. So again, I repeat, if this Wisconsin joint resolution held this governor accountable.
Not to cut you off. We understand the question. And
okay.
Its premise.
Okay, then I will go to the next.
To the joint resolution.
Yes.
So we understand.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Run amok here.
Okay, very good. Second of all, I'm hearing a lot about vagueness. You heard it too. We don't know how this exactly is going to work. The Article 5, costs, con, and all that. So a second issue that I'm not hearing again, with all the assertions of we don't know how this is going to work. We don't know, it's vague, the language is vague, we'll work it out, we're assured. Why am I not hearing in this hearing, here's my second question, the fact that Article 5 stipulates that it can be by the state legislatures or by ratifying conventions in the state. Why isn't the alarm, urgency in the alarm raised about the fact that it may not be you gentlemen and ladies that will be on those legislative panels, those conventions, or rather in the legislature approving said amendments? It may be a convention chosen by the ideologues of the first question I asked. They may determine that. There's no restraint. I'm hearing vague. That's not legal language. That's just the status of where we are right now. Third issue is, why is it we need these amendments? Now, I understand the arguments, balanced budget, et cetera, term limits. I even hear the pro-life people calling for an amendment. Why is it not the case that we're resorting to Article 6 of the Constitution, holding said people to their oath of office? We have plenty of laws. How are we going to hold the new lawmakers, especially if we get a runaway convention? How are we going to hold them accountable if we can't hold anyone accountable now in so many crisis areas? Those are 3 questions I've not heard addressed. So, Mr. Chairman, thank you. You admit the first one. The second one still stands. Why am I hearing nothing about the danger of a ratifying convention that is yet really that there's no specificity? Who's going to run it? The ideologues in Congress who have the same ideological background as our governor. Okay, that's the second one. Thank you.
We're not here to answer questions for the authors. We're here to hear testimonies. So your testimony is in context.
Thank you. So I'm raising the question because I'm not hearing the answers that being addressed. Thank you.
So there is a process.
I'm aware of the process. Thank you.
And we will exec and we will take your questions and we will have to answer those questions amongst ourselves.
Would I be able to get an answer by letter from the committee? Is that possible?
You would have to talk to the authors or people that are testifying in favor afterwards out in the hallway, and you could get some of your questions answered. We will exec at some point, potentially. We're not sure where we go. We will discuss. But if we exec, we will have those questions answered before we vote.
So, Mr. Chairman, forgive me, just as a response, I'm hearing that the questions will be answered, or is it a process?
We didn't draft the bill. We will.
Understood.
This is a hearing, so we'll hear testimonies. Your testimony, your questions are duly noted, but it's not for this body to answer your questions on behalf of the author of the bill at this time.
All right, fair enough.
That's the process.
That's the process.
And to your first question, the process is we passed legislation. The governor gave a mandate. It's in the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court will rule. That's a process. It's in the process.
May I ask?
If you don't like the process, you can vote on election day.
I understand.
Or run for office.
I understand. Following up to that, as part of my testimony. Under 323.1, you know very well the power of the Constitution, state of Wisconsin, joint resolution. It did not need the governor's approval. That's why the joint legislation.
We're not discussing that. I gave that for reference that we're in a process. So you're in a process, we're in a process. You're giving testimony, duly noted. Your questions are duly noted.
I guess my fears haven't been addressed. It is my Constitution, Mr. Chairman, too. There is a process that a governor has defied. So what is the follow-up to that?
We're not here to debate the governor's. That's in the Supreme Court. I gave you reference. It's in the Supreme Court. That's the process. There is a separation of powers, and there are protocols that we're following. And so we're not answering questions for the authors. You can ask the authors, but we understand your context and your frustration, and we all share that. Trust me. So we're here to support.
Thank you, but it was an illustration of the ideologues who will be choosing the delegates in CONCON. How will you tie them down? Will that too have to go to the Supreme Court? I don't hear that being addressed. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. You answered my question concerning the state of Wisconsin. You did not answer concerning my fear concerning the Article 5 process. The very question raised by James Madison.
And that goes to the authors. And then we will discuss.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members. It's Ed Perkins from Appleton, Wisconsin. I want to start by thanking.
And then we will discuss.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members. It's Ed Perkins from Appleton, Wisconsin. I'll start by thanking. Rush warned in that statement, and this is not his exact words, but it's a recap on my part, but Rush warned that the leftist 2015, he's saying, have no interest in working with the Republicans or those who seek to solve or resolve our differences when it comes to the Constitution. He says the left's goal is the destruction of all supporters of the U.S. Constitution. Not long after that, if I recall correctly, there was an incident which began to shed some light further on that statement. That was a place called Ferguson, Missouri. I think we pretty much remember what happened there. Not going to recap it. Then I moved forward since that time. Portland, Seattle, Minneapolis, Kenosha, DC, Milwaukee. What do we see? I saw death, lot of destruction, and
we're asking you to get to
the point.
The joint resolution.
The point I'm getting to is the problems that we have in front of us have to be understood, I think, in light of the cultural problems that we're seeing right now. And if there are those who believe that a constitutional convention, Constitution of States Convention, is going to be the answer, I have to ask, as we heard a few minutes ago, why we haven't seen the changes coming already if a Constitution of States is going to bring forth a change in our society by itself. I don't think so. And I think the problems that we've got with the Constitution of States is that we believe and trust what Rush Limbaugh was saying. You have to recognize you cannot trust. If you have a large contingent of our citizens totally opposed to the Constitution, I believe in their actions, they have proven that, and they've stated it in words. Then I have to ask, will not those individuals also be part of a Constitution of States organization and effort? You aren't going to exclude them. They are also citizens. So what's my point? My point would be, I think you're opening up the can of worms. We don't have solutions. We've got the maybes. We need to try this, we need to try that. We're going to pull a pig out of the poke and hope that we've accomplished something. And in doing so, you expose harm to the Constitution, I believe, significant. I'm going to end very quickly by saying these words are starting to come more and more into vogue, I think, in our discussions and in our country a little bit. Mr. Murphy did reference this. It's the word enforcement. We are having problems enforcing the laws of this land from our governors on down to the people in the streets. And if you think a COS or CON is going to change that, I say no, it will not. It will not change that. So that is why I'm opposing it. I think it will open a can of worms. I don't see any definition or anything of surety here that we're going to achieve anything positive with it. And the dangers, I believe, are there, significant, to bring harm to this nation through that process. Thank you.
Before you leave, I want to ask, are there any questions? I have a question. So we've gone through a lot of debate or discussion so far. We've had content saying the same thing, that we're in a crisis. You've identified it, others are identifying. So we clearly hear that there's those who are testifying in favor, who are saying something must be done. You're saying this isn't the right way. Do you have any suggestions?
Obey and follow and honor the Constitution of the United States.
And it's alleged that's not happening. So we're past that. So now what do we do?
Enforcement. Enforcement. And in some cases, I'd like to add,
suggestions?
There are many of us, I think, that today are looking for enforcement at the highest levels of our government for those who some of us would argue, I'll use the word, are traitors to the Constitution. Enforcement.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Next.
Dear Senators and members of the committee, Dave Kempen from Appleton, Wisconsin. Thank you, and I feel honored to have your attention. I strongly oppose an Article 5 Constitutional Convention of the States, or whatever we choose to call it. It would place our constitutional protections in great jeopardy. Please remember your oaths to uphold the Constitution and vote no. There are some well thought out videos that are easily available online at jbs.org from the homepage of the John Birch Society, the jbs.org. Click on a video tab, then the Constitutional Corner tab, then the Constitution tab. There will be available a 6-part series called Change It or Obey It. Please take a look at that, inform yourselves and others, and once again, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Thank you very much. Next, Matt Truella. And then on deck is Mark Meckler. And if you hear in the hearing room, or in the overflow room, if you hear your name, make your way to the hearing room and we'll find a place for you to get ready to speak. And then after Mark Meckler will be John and Jackie from McFarland. Go ahead, Matt.
Hey, good to be here, Assemblyman. And had an awful experience with a cup of coffee, so that's what delayed me before. So, good to be with you all
So
here.
you're saying you ran to Walmart to get a new shirt and you're back?
Just up from there, Kohl's. So, but I did get it off the clearance rack for only $9. So I'm here to say that I oppose this resolution wholeheartedly. I testified against it 3 years ago when it came up. I see here it says that whereas the federal government has ceased to live under a proper interpretation of the Constitution, that's absolutely true. They have. The question is how to resolve the problem that we have with the Constitution being ignored and not followed for decades and decades now. And I submit to you that the answer is not Article 5. The answer is Article 6. Every magistrate here in the state of Wisconsin takes an oath to both the U.S. Constitution and the state Constitution. And Article 6 of the U.S. Constitution is where the oath is found for all magistrates. And the oath that you take is not an oath of subservience to the federal government, nor is it an oath to uphold unjust or immoral or unconstitutional court opinions by the federal judiciary. Your oath is to the Constitution itself, and therefore your duty is to uphold the Constitution. That's what needs to be done, an Article 6, not an Article 5. We've seen that the federal government hasn't followed the Constitution for decades. We've seen that the judiciary has rewritten the Constitution, which they brag about and openly admit, all because the states haven't done which I noticed is here also, when it says, whereas the federal government has invaded the legitimate roles of the states. I agree with that. States have been reduced to mere provinces of the federal government, mere implementation centers of the federal government's immoral, unjust, unconstitutional laws, policies, and court opinions. And it's your duty, your God-given duty, to check them, to interpose against their evil and stop it. All what's happening here is we're going to create yet another piece of paper, which another Congress can ignore, which another federal court can trample. It's been going on for decades. This will change nothing. The Supreme Court has trampled over amendments in the past made to the Constitution. Look at the history of the 11th Amendment, for example. So it's extremely important that Article 6 takes place and that you uphold your oath, which you took in the sight of God, and that you check this federal government that has long left the constraints of the Constitution, which men fought, bled, and died to establish in this country. Don't allow another piece of paper to be chased after so that just another court, another Congress can trample it. Do your duty, check them. When it comes to the money, just quit taking the money. Wisconsin takes more money than we pay in to the federal government. Quit taking the money. You don't need a constitutional, you don't need an Article 5 Convention of the States to do this. You have the authority to do it now, just as the man 2 people prior to me said. He's exactly right. Your authority is there, it's God-given, and you need to exercise it. And that's my brief thoughts today.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Hearing no questions, thank you for your testimony.
Okay, thank you.
Mark Meckler. And next will be John and Jackie Deals. And then there will be Curtis and Dominic will be after that. Dominique, you may go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, honorable members of the committee, my name is Mark Meckler. I'm the president of Convention of States Action. We are the national organization that is moving this effort forward in all 50 states. Today, over 5 million American citizens are involved in this movement. They are in not only all 50 states, but every single state legislative district in America and every single congressional district in America. They represent every demographic, every age, every race, creed, and color. And they've all stood up to say that it's time for the states, and specifically you in the state legislatures, to stand strong against the federal government, to stand for the people, to stand for federalism, to stand for the very principle on which this country was founded, and that is uniquely the principle of self-governance. The founders answered a question, a unique question in human history that had not been asked by people founding a government before, and the question was simple. It was, who decides? We know exactly how they answered the question because we have it in beautiful calligraphy. You can all see the 3 words in your mind. The answer of the founders was, we the people. And they designed a beautifully balanced federalist system that gave the federal government limited enumerated powers, and the states and the people broad unenumerated powers. Everything not reserved specifically to the federal government left to the people and the states. Today we find ourselves in an incredibly different situation than that. In fact, the federal government has broad and unenumerated powers granted by a Supreme Court out of control and run amok, and the states now are limited. Every day the federal government gets bigger and the citizens get smaller. Thank God, and I do mean thank God, that the founders had the prescience to put the second clause of Article 5 into the Constitution. On September 15, 1787, Colonel George Mason stood and he addressed the assembly. This is 2 days before the end of convention. They're done. The Constitution has been completely drafted and they're ready to go home. And Mason stands up. He was one of the people who spoke most at convention. I'm sure they thought, oh no, here goes George again. And he said, gentlemen, we have a terrible problem with the document we've drafted. We've given the power to Congress to propose amendments, but we've not given the same power to the people acting through the states to propose amendments. And then he asked a question which I think resonates over through history, and we ought to ask ourselves this question today, and that is, do we really believe, are we so naive that we believe that a federal government that becomes a tyranny will ever propose the proper amendments to restrain its own tyranny. Usually when I say that, somebody in the room chuckles because they understand history. Never in recorded human history has a tyrant, has somebody who has usurped power, has a tyrannical government made a decision one day that they're going to give that power back. I think that they laughed in that room that day, September 15, 1787. In fact, I'm sure of it. We have Madison's notes. They're pretty clear. Madison's notes say in that spot only these two words, abbreviated Latin, nin com, stands for no comment. There was no debate. These were men who debated on how to debate. There was no debate. It was a collective forehead slap, if they used that gesture back then. It's the only thing I'm aware of in the United States Constitution where there was no debate, and it was adopted unanimously to give you, state legislatures, the power to rein in federal tyranny. It's an incredibly unique power. You, the state legislatures, are the most powerful actors in the United States federal government. That surprises most legislators when I talk to them in the states. When you had your orientation, they probably showed you where the restrooms were, showed you where legislative counsel's office was, showed you where your office was. They didn't tell you you were the most powerful people in the United States federal government. Why are you the most powerful people? Because only you have the power to call a convention, to propose amendments, and then actually to ratify those amendments, giving you the power to actually alter the structure of the federal government. Why you? Why didn't they just leave that in Congress's hands? Why not give it to the president or the courts? The answer is self-evident. The founders were you. They were just like you. They had served in colonial governments. They had served on town councils, state legislatures. And it's not that they thought that they were better than the people who would serve at the federal government level. It's that they trusted government close to the people. And they knew that someday a firewall would be needed. Somebody would be required to stand against federal tyranny. They had experience with centralized government tyranny. And they wanted the people to have the power close to the people. You have not only this authority, but this responsibility. This is what the founders expected of you. There have been numerous questions asked today, and I'm going to just run through and answer a couple of them real quick, if I might. It was asked, what about emergencies under a balanced budget? And I think that's a great question. Every balanced budget amendment that's ever been proposed that I'm aware of in American history has an emergencies clause. It says if the federal government, say if the federal government, 2/3 of Congress and both houses declare an emergency, then they can violate the balanced budget. Everyone I've ever seen, 2/3, 3/4, whatever it is, there is an emergencies clause. Why would they follow any amendments if they don't follow the Constitution now? This is actually one of my favorite questions, and I think it's Representative Murphy was first to ask this question. Why would they follow it if they don't follow the Constitution now? The answer is, surprisingly for most conservatives, they do follow the Constitution now. The question is, which Constitution are we talking about? I saw the pocket Constitution handed out. Anybody who believes that we live under that pocket Constitution is living a fantasy. We haven't lived under that Constitution for over 115 years. How do I know this? Go order a Constitution from the government publishing office. I've done it. I usually bring it with me. It'll cost you about $130, and no, it's not printed on gold leaf, but it is 2,738 pages as of the 2012 edition. It's over 3,000 pages with all supplements. It contains every Supreme Court case ever issued to tell you what that little pocket Constitution means. And the federal government, they follow that big Constitution religiously. They've given themselves the power through the courts. So do they follow the Constitution? They do. And in fact, we have a long history of the federal government following constitutional amendments. Why? I heard it's just a piece of paper. Why would they follow it? I agree with that. What's the magic pixie dust? And the answer is politics. All of you got elected. You understand politics. You understand political muscle and organizing. And the reality is there is no more muscular political effort that can be done in the United States of America than to get a constitutional amendment ratified. It's the highest bar in our entire system of American governance. It requires 3/4 of the states to agree on something. How often does 3/4 of your legislature agree on something? So it's incredible when you can get 3/4 of states to agree on something. It means the vast majority of the American public have spoken. And we have a long history in this country that amendments are followed. And I agree over time, we will drift away from them. It takes about 100 years historically. So the idea that we would pass amendments and the federal government would just choose to ignore. It's not supported by history. It's not reality. Quite frankly, it's a fantasy. I've heard the language is vague. You can do anything under this language. The people who allege that are not scholars. They're not lawyers. They're not people who studied the issue. On my legal advisory board are the finest conservative constitutional scholars in America. They had input on the drafting of this resolution. Robbie George from Princeton, Randy Barnett, who runs the Georgetown Center for the Constitution, Mike Ferris, Rob Natelson, the premier writer and author and student of Article 5 in the United States of America, Mark Levin. Whatever you want to do at the Constitution, and I'll leave that with absolutely, as there are multiple protections along the way. Every state, 34 states, have to agree on the terms of the convention. Under what scenario do people think when 34 states agree that they're going to go there and then they're all going to disagree? You control your own commissioners to the convention. You commission them. You have authority to control them. You have done so in legislation already. They go to convention. You can withdraw their credentials at convention. Any state can withdraw their commissioners or replace their commissioners at any time. This is standard law of agency. It's not even complicated constitutional law. I heard a question, why is this necessary now? Do we really have to ask that question? Look at what's going on in Washington, D.C., and I'm not being partisan when I say this. Almost 29 trillion in debt. Our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, and into perpetuity enslaved by the debt being imposed by the federal government. The federal government with its thumb on the scales here in Wisconsin, 60 to 65% of your budget, you, the state legislatures of a sovereign state, 60 to 65% of your budget now controlled by the federal government. It's unconscionable. Why now? Washington, D.C. doesn't represent the American people anymore. Whether it's Republicans or Democrats, 50% of the country is angry about what's going on in D.C., and they should. They should be angry because this stuff was not meant to be decided in Washington, D.C. I got to address this. I heard a quick comment about Rush Limbaugh. Rush Limbaugh spoke multiple times in favor of the use of Article 5. God rest his soul. I heard a question about state legislatures or ratifying conventions, and God bless the pastor that came up here and has done so much great work for the Lord, but he has no idea what he's talking about on Article 5. State ratifying conventions are controlled by whom? By you. What's a state ratifying convention? Whatever you decide it is. It's not Congress. The method is chosen by Congress. It will be state legislatures or state ratifying conventions, and it goes to you here in the state legislature, and you will decide what your ratifying convention looks like. It's federalism. You might decide your ratifying convention is your legislature. You have the right to do that. You might decide to appoint people. You might decide to elect people, but it's up to you. The states control the ratifying process. I'll conclude with this. The question has been asked several times. What is the alternative? The vast majority of us agree that the federal government is out of control. Over 85% of Americans say we need some sort of balanced budget amendment. Same numbers for some form of term limits. 72% of Americans say that the federal government is too big and does too much. This crosses party lines. We all agree. We may not agree exactly where it's too big or why it's too big, but we all agree it's too big and does too much. The opponents say, don't do this. Do something else. Most of them offer no something else. I've heard elect good people. How's that working out for us? I heard use Article 6, make people live up to their oaths. How's that working out for us? The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and hoping for a different result. For decades now, people have been wanting to call an Article 5 convention, and the same opponents step up and try to stop it. Today, $29 trillion in debt, the federal government completely out of control, and states reduced to mere fiefdoms of the federal government. It is time for the states to stand up and fight back. 15 states have already joined this effort. This has been filed in 49 states. It's been passed by committees in 30 states. 23 states have passed it in one house or another. And I'm here to ask you to pass the resolution, to vote favorably, and to make Wisconsin the 16th state to join the Convention of States. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Are there any questions? Representative Rantham.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was spinning with thought after the last two presenters prior to you. They were actually speaking in opposition. 2 points I took away from their concerns were the enforcement factor and maintaining the oath element, and you touched on them as well in your presentation. By the way, thank you very much for your testimony. I had the same question regarding oath, maintenance of your oath on January 7th, that people took, January 4th of this year, to be in the assembly specifically, when we were looking to address the resolution to end the executive order for the emergency. And 42 people voted no. So it hit me kind of hard that day, not just because I was the lead in the assembly on the resolution, but that was the question I had. It's like, well, I'm here to serve, and I took an oath to abide by the Constitution of our state, and this vote, and I did a floor speech on this, really brief, 58 seconds, I think it was, probably one of the shortest speeches on the floor, but that question hit me, and it's hitting me again today. If we take oaths to be public servants and to serve the people that put us here, and to be, to interpose, as Pastor Torello would say, why did they vote no? It's politics. It's got to be. It's a political ideology that you embrace more than your belief or your confidence in your oath. So my question is, if politics is driving people to not enforce existing laws, if politics is driving people to not uphold their oath that they took to be in the position to serve of, by, and for the people, is Constitution of States and Article 5 going to affect that? Is it going to prevent politics from creating more issues?
Thank you for the question, Representative. No, I don't think it does prevent politics. I think what it does is engage in politics. And actually, what I believe we need in this country are more people engage. Like you saw all the activists here engage. Over 30,000 citizens here in Wisconsin that have signed the Convention of States petition. Probably, I don't know this for sure, but probably the largest grassroots organization in Wisconsin. It is in most states in the country right now. And those people are broadly and widely engaged in politics. They're here at the Capitol today in huge numbers, and have been for the last several years. So I want more politics, not less politics. What I want is a muscular political effort. We all want more people who are engaged and understand our Constitution. If you want to engage in the largest constitutional education exercise in the history of the United States of America, then we call a Convention of States. It will be on C-SPAN 24/7. It will be in the schools from K through colleges. It will be on the news every single night. And this is what we need in America. We need to have people paying attention to the Constitution, not having it be some arcane document in the National Archives that in most schools we're not even teaching our kids about anymore. So I want the politics to come into play. And by that, I mean, I want us, those of us who believe in the greatness of this country and the constitutional and declarations, foundations for the country, the Judeo-Christian principles on which it's based, I want us engaged in politics in a broad scale. That's the only way you get to a convention in the first place. And that's the only way that a convention will propose amendments that ultimately get ratified.
Thank you for your response. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
If you could, Article 6 has been brought up.
Yes, sir.
Do you have a direct answer to the contrast between an Article 5 and an Article 6? Because obviously the premise for either is the same. So everybody's on the same team.
Right.
It's just, how do we fix the crises that
right.
is being asserted here?
I do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Article 6 is the oath of office. And the suggestion is we should just get people to obey the oath of office. And I would propose that if somebody knows how to do that, they have the wisdom of Solomon. I'm unaware of how you enforce that. I'm not aware of, other than removal from office by recall or in an election. If you fail to live up to your oath, you can be essentially recalled by your constituents if you have recall in a state, or you can be voted out in the next election. It's not a mechanism, and it was not designed by the founders as a mechanism for the people to regain their power. The founders would have said, if people are violating their oath of office, throw them out of office. So it's not a mechanism for the regaining of power. It is a point, and it's a good point. If people fail to live up to their oath of office, then in the next election, their constituents should remove them from office.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Next speaking is John and Jackie. Are you here? John and Jackie? If you're in the overflow room and you can hear this hearing, we ask that if you're on deck to speak, that you come forward or come into the hearing room so you can be prepared to speak. There. Curtis Dominique. On deck is Jason Murphy. If Jason Murphy could come forward, and then after Jason Murphy will be Alexander Worth from Chilton. Go ahead, you guys.
There you go.
Okay. Yeah, my name is Curtis Ewell. I'm here in strong opposition to AJR 9. I'd just like to read it. Obviously, you know these already, but I think some people forget what we're in the process of losing if we go to this convention of states. Congress shall make no law rejecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Also, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. If there are any of these rights that you don't want and you're trying to change your form of government, then that would be the only reason to open a convention of states. These rights are under attack, so it is not hard to figure out which rights would be removed in the new government. There is nothing in the Constitution that states when you call an Article 5 convention that is required to take up only the items proposed in the request, so it opens the whole Constitution. There is already a way to add amendments through Congress. For 225 years, amendments have been proposed by Congress and ratified by the states. This has been done at least 16 times. The 17th never got ratified by the states, but it's our law anyway. According to Article 5, it just takes a 2/3 vote from both houses and 3/4 of the states to ratify. And if you are concerned that your proposed amendment won't get through the current Congress, imagine handing the same current Congress a pen to rewrite the Constitution. The only reason to open up a convention of states is to institute new government. Your bill, AJR 9, states, quote, "The calling of a convention of states limited to proposing amendments." I say they will not limit the proposed amendments. The calling of the Convention of States limited to proposing amendments to the Constitution of the United States that impose fiscal restraints on federal government. You can do that right now in a regular amendment process. Limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government. Our Constitution already limits the power and jurisdiction of the federal government. And limit the terms of office for its officials and for members of Congress. Term limits sound good, but really will not help. The senators or congressmen that know he cannot be reelected, has no accountability whatsoever to the American people, and could do his dead level worst in his final years in office. Far better is it for us to educate our fellow Americans to vote out the corrupt politicians that undermine our wonderful Constitution and our liberties. This is why it's imperative that each one of us has one and only one legal vote per U.S. citizen with ID and signature, and hand counted and get rid of the machines. America is really waking up to what is happening on a broad scale on many levels, whether it's a fair and free election or America's First and Second Amendments. This is how we affect change, through the constitutional process of an informed American people holding their elected officials accountable, or removing them through the ballot box. Thomas Jefferson said, quote, "If a nation expects to be ignorant and free, it expects what never was and never will be." Again, the advocates of the Convention of States are not being honest in the way they are presenting this as a one amendment convention, because they are even going back to old requests for a convention of completely different reasons that were proposed, such as getting out of the Civil War. If you think the outcome of a convention of states would be anything desirable with the likes of our current Congress or any of their representatives or appointees to the convention they would send forth, you are misled. Like a lot of big cities where there are many people in close proximity, the crime rate escalates. So with Congress, when they are together with nothing to do, the crime level goes up, as you can see in H.R. 1 and H.R. 5. This is where our freedoms are being stripped away. But we still have a way to hold them accountable. If someone does not like the freedoms enumerated in our U.S. Constitution, they are free to live in many other countries of tyranny around the world, but not here. This is a constitutional republic, and we have a wonderful Constitution. It's the politicians that need to be changed, not the Constitution. I heard earlier that the average Constitution is 17 years old. Ours is 230 years plus. Leave it alone. The lie the lobbyists are portraying that the Constitutional Convention is the way to add amendments and fix our current problems is pretty diabolical. There are new constitutions that are already drafted that completely dissolve the states and disarm the people under the new regimes. This is very dangerous and will basically eliminate our constitutional republic as we know it. Thank you.
Dominica, you're also going to testify?
Yes.
We'll wait. Sure.
I'm an average American housewife from Quantico, Wisconsin, that loves our country. And I agree with you that the federal government has invaded the legitimate role of the states and is completely overstepping its constitutional powers on several fronts. And I've always loved these words out of the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence, indeed, will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. And on a scale of freedom versus tyranny, it's quite possible that a balanced budget amendment or term limits, et cetera, though important, may fall more into a light or transient cause when compared to losing freedom. And I've no doubt some of you have the best intentions, the purest motives, but unfortunately they aren't going to alter the end results of a convention of states. For over 2 centuries, American lawmakers have been adding amendments through Congress. We can do the same with the balanced budget amendment. But if we open this Constitution through a convention of states for even one amendment, it opens the whole Constitution up to institute new government. And let's face it, we do not have the incredible statesmen of yesteryear that drafted our Constitution. Today, we have a bunch of DC politicians with special interests that have gotten us in the mess we currently find ourselves in. Our US Constitution is not the problem, it's the solution, along with turning back to God. Experience shouts to us that if the majority of the US Congress isn't obeying our Constitution now, they surely won't obey anything new that you or they come up with. Who are we kidding? Just as we argue that gun control will never restrict criminals from getting guns, but only strips the law-abiding citizens of protection, so also changing our Constitution will never restrict the criminals in Congress, but only strip the law-abiding members of Congress and American people of protection. Some here want to open the Constitution through a convention just enough to pass their 2 or 3 items, and they believe, naively, falsely, 1, that it will make a difference in how the current Congress obeys the law, and 2, that they can control Congress and make it behave and not do anything more to the Constitution than what they have specified in this bill. Unfortunately, that's the realm of make-believe and not the happily ever after kind. In reality, there are many on both sides of the aisle that would pounce upon our slightly open Constitution and rip her open, violating her faster than you can ever imagine. We can't open the Constitution even an inch with a convention and make her vulnerable to the whims of her proven enemies in Congress. They are brazen about how they defy her. Every time we turn around, they're trying to remove another of our God-given rights protected by our Constitution. Look, DC can't even agree on what happened in the election. How in the world would they ever come to an agreement on a new form of government? And the new Constitution would be something that could never fit in your pocket or purse that people could study and learn to remain a free people. It would be hundreds, thousands of pages long, and they could hide a lot in there. And the people wouldn't know a Constitution of that size. Our founders are so wise about that and about the depravity of man. And I know we've heard a lot about how much power you guys have, but I want to just remind that the founders knew that power can corrupt even good men. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. The Bill of Rights is basically the 10 Commandments of thou shalt nots to the government. The founders sought to protect we the people's rights from the government, but most of the current lawmakers in Washington seek the reverse, to empower government at the expense of individual liberty. In closing, I implore you to vote against AJR 9, calling for a convention of states and inadvertently opening our Constitution to the will of our enemies. The majority of these politicians in the US Congress seek to undermine our freedoms at every turn in exchange for power, wealth, advancing globalism, killing national sovereignty, implementing socialism, controlling every aspect of our lives. These are the very people that would take charge of drafting an entirely new government. I don't know how to say it any clearer. This would open a Pandora's box, the likes of which we've never seen, and could never close the lid. Please realize the lobbyists have their own agenda and could be using you and your good intentions to get approval for a convention of states and thus put our Constitution in great peril. Do not let history look back and name you among those who betrayed liberty through either incorrect information or mischanneled good intentions, or because when you realized the truth, you were afraid to stand up to your colleagues and change your vote to no. If anyone thinks they are doing America or freedom a favor by calling for a convention of states, or that they will be some sort of founding father for their efforts, that couldn't be further from the truth. If we walk through this convention of states door, we forever shut the door on free America. I beg everyone to wake up to the reality of how close we are to losing America, the land of the free, the home of the brave. A first-generation US citizen who had fled from his prior communist country stated of his new homeland of America in his beautiful accent, "Don't lose this place, because you are not going to be as lucky as me. Because if you lose this place, you have no place to go." Unquote. Thank you.
Very true. Thank you. Any questions? Representative Fiscal.
Thank you. I guess I could have asked this question of a bunch of others too, so sorry to jump in with when you two are sitting there. But first of all, establish a little credibility for myself here. prior to being in the legislature, I taught civics courses at a private high school for a dozen years. And so I dabbled in this stuff pretty extensively over the years. There are four methods of amending the United States Constitution. Of those four methods, two of them, there's the proposal and there's the ratification. Two of them start with the 2/3 of the states calling on Congress to call for a national convention, which is what you're disputing should not happen. So my first question would be, is that a mistake in the United States Constitution?
No, I don't believe that's a mistake in the
Okay,
United
so
States.
no, I'll just keep to that. And I don't mean to cut you off, but limited time here is. So if it's not a mistake, under what scenario would you say something like this could be used?
To institute a new government.
And that's it?
That's it.
Is that in the Constitution?
Yes, it's delineated in the Declaration of Independence.
That's not
yeah.
the Constitution.
Okay.
I respect the Declaration
Okay,
of
but
Independence, but that's not in the
referring
Constitution.
to the Declaration of Independence.
It's implying that you're saying.
They feed off of one another.
Okay, it's not referring it though, because it's not written there.
You are correct, but they feed off one another.
Okay, and so in this section where there's from this section where the articles or the possibilities of how to amend the Constitution are laid out in the Constitution, it's open to all types of amendments, correct? But you're saying that these two specifically is just if we want to eliminate the United States of America, kind of scrap it and start over.
To the opening of the Convention of the States, not the adding of an amendment.
Okay, so I don't want to dispute your concerns, okay? Because
there's no
I understand
controls
what
over
your
that.
concerns are, and I'm not saying that they're illegitimate because there are a lot of unopened boxes here, questions, because this
Yes.
hasn't been done before.
Way too many.
But certainly when the first amendment to the Constitution was being pushed through, which is the Bill of Rights, of course, and the subsequent ones after that, there were mysterious questions of how this was going to operate along the way there also, but they have been done. Over 26 of the 27 amendments were done with one method. The other one was only done, because 21st Amendment was done with what I like to call the second method. And so at some point in time, the concerns over those were overcome. Don't you feel that those concerns could be overcome by actually taking through the process of what it is that needs to be done in order to see that the will of the people is accomplished here? Because my goodness, if we simply eliminate these two ways, there is no way for the states to propose a constitutional amendment. It has to start in Congress, and that's what you're trying to fight against is the national
here
government.
because I didn't say eliminate either one of them. I'm not asking you to eliminate either one. But if we are going to institute a new government, yes, let's open up a convention of states. But we have an amendment process through Congress already that works just fine for these amendments. So stop acting like this is the best way to do this. This is not even remotely a good way to do this right now. We already know a convention can be run away. We had it happen already 230 years ago. And we got a good constitution out of it. But we, like my wife said, we do not have statesmen to control this. And it was only by grace of God that we got that constitution then, because the Almighty God stepped in when they asked him for his help.
Well, I would contend, just to close up here, I did not say this was the best way. I said it is one way.
It is one way.
By eliminating this, you are eliminating
I'm
the
not
ability of the
eliminating the
states.
amendment process.
Well, you are essentially eliminating by saying we can't use it except for one purpose, which isn't written in the Constitution. And so by effectively eliminating this from any sort of possibility, you're taking away the possibility of the states, the people that you're trying to restore power to, you're taking away that possibility for them to initiate or propose a constitutional amendment.
Currently, we still have a ballot box. They're trying to take that from us too. But currently,
we still do have a ballot box. No dispute with that. That's all.
Can I just add something?
Sure.
I was just going to say, we were faced with these options. Why would we take the one that is the most risky? Like, if we can do it through a safer process, especially with the current Congress and the current volatility in the nation, if we can do it with a safer process, wouldn't wisdom dictate that we should go that way?
Well, I'm not going to engage in usually the process of answering questions because I'm not the one down there, but I'll answer it. We've been around 230 some years now, and it hasn't happened yet. And obviously, since 26 of the 27 of them have done with one method, that is probably the smoothest way to do it. That doesn't mean that we eliminate from contention all the others. This is the grassroots way of starting a constitutional convention. And I just am largely stunned by the people who push grassroots movements are the ones who are opposed to doing it.
Because of the great danger.
So as I said, there are things that have to be ironed out, but they're never going to be ironed out if we don't go through the process itself. Our grassroots movements is still the ballot box. And if we don't wake up to the fact that these people are not following the Constitution and we vote them out, whatever we do with a new Constitution is not going to make a hill of beans difference than what we have going on right now. And we know this Constitution works if it's followed. I don't expect you're going to change your mind sitting right in front of me here. So most people are too invested in their opinion on this to change their minds anymore.
It is exciting, though, to see how many people are really getting into
Well, yeah, certainly. We agree on that. I bet we probably agree on 99% of things. But we disagree on this one. And I appreciate you coming and being the one to put up with me finally asking a question to somebody.
Representative Murphy.
I had one question quick before you go. Sir, in the beginning of your testimony, you said something about the 17th Amendment and about its ratification. You didn't mention the 17th?
I did not mention the 17th
Okay.
Amendment. I mentioned that it had been used 17 times.
Oh.
Since the Bill of Rights, there's been 17 amendments added to.
I think
The-
you mentioned that, I think what you meant to say was the 16th hadn't been ratified? And you said- I
Right,
think
the
you said
16th Amendment has not been ratified.
Oh, well, that is my least favorite amendment.
Right?
Fighting with the 17th for the bottom slot, but
Yes,
I would contend that the 16th Amendment is a lot of the reason that we're here today.
yes.
Because the
Some tax-
16th Amendment gives the federal government the power to tax individuals. And at that point, money started flowing, the money flowed to Washington. And then whether it was Common Core or Obamacare or anything else, we have to do what the federal government says to get our money back. And that is the root of all evil when it comes to this debate.
Yes.
And it was never ratified by 3/4 of the states.
I did not know that, and that's an interesting, fact.
They just stated that it was law. It never got full 3/4 ratified. Thank you for your time.
Interesting.
Thank you guys very much for your
Thank you.
testimony. Alexander Worth, Jason Murphy, are you guys testifying together? Nope. Okay. So Jason, you're first, and then Alexander's next. And then it will be Scott Frostman from Baraboo. And then Jason, if you could say where you're from.
Sure.
Thank you.
You can go ahead.
I'm Jason Murphy, a street preacher who's currently living in Chilton, Wisconsin. And just came here to say that I oppose this joint resolution because a constitutional convention is not what's going to fix the problems of the tyrannical actions of the governor, of whoever else is in power. Upholding the Constitution will be the only thing that helps. And none of these abuses of power would have gone on for a length of time if this legislator would have checked Governor Evers' tyranny. And I know that there's been later that his tyranny has been checked at a later time, but that's after playing a bunch of political games with a tyrant. So I would encourage you to uphold the Constitution, Article 6, which is the supreme law of the land, not the Supreme Court, not anything else. So that's your duty before God, to uphold the Constitution and protect our rights. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you very much for your testimony.
Yep.
So next is Alexander Worth. And then Scott Frostman. And then if Penny Haas could make their way to the hearing room. You will be after Scott Frostman. Go ahead, Alexander.
So I guess the first issue that we would have for this is that our nation has forgot God. And John Adams said, our Constitution was made for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to govern any other. And that's our problem, is that we have forgotten God. Because our legislators, all y'all, you're not religious or moral people. Because if you were, you wouldn't be legislating perversity and homosexuality. You wouldn't be legislating the regulation of baby murder. And you'd be holding true to God's law. And that's the problem with America, is you're not doing your jobs according to what God has given you. And we demand you not to throw away or amend our Constitution like you want to. Well, not really throw away, but to uphold it as a moral and religious people, as your duty to the Lord. And that's what I have.
Any questions? Representative Rantham?
More of a statement.
If you could keep it short.
I do appreciate your coming today, but I do not appreciate being categorized as someone who doesn't follow the Lord and what he's doing and why he's here. And if you want to talk to somebody who's here for those very reasons, I'm in 304 North after this.
We have talked to people that say they follow the Lord, but they don't.
You haven't talked to me.
We're here to debate.
Yeah. I
Resolution 9.
I took offense to being called
Thank you.
that.
As you should.
Thank you for your testimony. Scott Frostman? Scott Frostman from Baraboo. And then Penny Haas will be on deck. And after Penny will be Larry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate, my name is Scott Frostman.
Hang on real quick.
I'm sorry. Oh, okay.
Penny and Larry may be testifying together. So I would like to also put on deck Vicky Austri from Germantown. If you could make your way to the hearing room. Oh, didn't register to speak? Oh, that's it then? Okay. So go ahead, Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Scott Frostman. I live in Baraboo, and I'm here representing just myself. As always, I thank you for the opportunity to come before the legislature. I think it's at the core of our democracy and our constitutional republic that people have the right to be heard. I thank you also for bringing this joint resolution forward, as this debate is what is at the core of our American system. That citizens can come into a body like this, have a respectful discussion, and largely agree that the mechanisms, and may disagree on some of the mechanisms, whether it's through Article 5 or whether it's through Article 6 of the Constitution, but fundamentally agree that the size and scope of the federal government is too large. I stand in support of Assembly Joint Resolution 9. For far too long and for far too great an extent, we have seen the ever-growing encroachment of our massive federal government into our daily lives and usurping the power expressly delegated to individual states. A close re-examination and review of the enumerated powers needs to occur. It is often said that the closest thing to eternal life on earth is a government program. Too often, the legislative body punts to an ever-growing administrative state to promulgate thousands of rules with a myriad of mandates. Our nation was founded on the principle of a limited central government. Individual states, not provinces or districts, were created to be relatively autonomous, and that these states would be united in the matters of a common defense and to facilitate uniformity in methods of commerce between states. The power in Washington has continued to grow. Unencumbered by the financial principles and guidelines that govern all other entities in the ability to simply create money, power has grown without ceasing, and we all get caught up in the nefarious web and morass of strings attached to large government mandates in what amounts to coercion. The state of Wisconsin's own government should also heed these words in the strings that the state of Wisconsin attaches to its financial mandates. I ask you to support, and you know, it's interesting that, you know, you have this kind of this, I think we all agree that something needs to be done. And part of it, I think, ends up being kind of in the mechanism of how that is accomplished. And I sincerely believe, I get it, that I, in many respects, agree with those who are in disagreement with the joint resolution. But I commend the authors of the joint resolution for bringing this forward to facilitate a conversation, a deep conversation on the United States Constitution. I love that we are having a discussion about Article 5 and Article 6 of the United States Constitution, that there are dozens of people here in this chamber or in the overflow room or watching on Wisconsin Eye that are looking at their copies of the United States Constitution. That's wonderful. And it ends up being a part of what engages us in this necessary debate to rein in the powers of government. So I support the joint resolution on the partly out of the aspect of that it allows the conversation to continue, it allows the conversation to move forward, and we, in all respects, that the citizens of the state of Wisconsin and the citizens of the United States of America are much better off for having this discussion. But I would stand in support of Assembly Joint Resolution 9. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you very much for your testimony. Thanks. Next is Penny Haas, Larry Haas. No other testimonies? Then we will move on to the next order of business, which will be we have a multitude of over 100 testimonies, mostly in favor, but many opposed that have testified and filled out their forms and sent emails. So now we will hear from the bill authors of Assembly Bills 23, 24, and 25. Representative Fiscal and Representative Jacques is on his way. Oh, Senator Jacques.
I did the same thing earlier.
Good memories are hard to.
Mr. Chair, I think I did it now. Senator Jacques has separate testimony for each. I combined 23 and 25. I have 24 separate. Which would you like me to do first?
At your discretion.
Okay, I think I'll start with the single one first that I don't have combined, so that would be 24.
Very good.
So that works for you. I assume that Senator Jacques will be here shortly, and Right now I have to wait for all this water to dry before I put my papers down.
And just a reminder that this is being televised live on Wisconsin Eye.
All right, and with your permission, I'll just begin and Andre can pick up when he comes on in. All right, thank you. So AB 24. Well, good morning. Is it still morning? It's not, is it? It's afternoon. So good afternoon, members of the committee. Thank you for allowing me to testify on AB 24, a bill that will help protect our freedom of religion here in Wisconsin. At the beginning of COVID-19 pandemic, the governor's stay-at-home order shut pretty much everything down. This was initially widely accepted as we needed time to understand the nature of the virus so that we could give doctors, hospitals, clinics, and healthcare workers time to ensure they knew how to best treat patients with the virus. But the interruption of our First Amendment constitutional protections has persisted for far too long. It has now been almost a full year of us facing the virus, and many churches and places of worship have been held in limbo, not knowing when or if they can open their doors. Worshipers and parishioners have lost their personal connection with their communities of faith at a time when many of them need it the most. This also comes at a time when suicides, mental illness, drug use are all on the rise. Many people go to churches for help, for support, for advice, and obviously to worship, all of which often help with mental illness, alcohol, or drug abuse. Further, many churches have support groups that people desperately need in times like these. This bill, AB 24, ensures that local health officials cannot close down churches or places of worship to control COVID-19. It's now been a year, and we are starting to see the devastation so many shutdowns have had on individuals. I would urge that committee members would support and pass this bill so that everyone in our state will have the ability to worship in person and to access the wealth of resources that their places of worship provide. There will be, I assume, more people coming after me to testify that will be able to describe perhaps some personal stories as to why this is a bill that is so urgently needed. And thank you for allowing me to testify. And I just realized that I left the copy of the bill up there. So in anticipation of waiting for Senator Jacques, I'd be happy to take any questions. Looks like Representative Ramthun is going to rescue me and bring me my binder. Thank you, Tim. There you are. We're all ready for you. You already testified.
Welcome, Senator Jacques. Thank you for joining us. I know you have a busy day, and I appreciate you working the building.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So not having the benefit of the very excellent testimony that my Assembly Lead Author just gave, I'm going to try to hit a few high points. Did he testify already on all three bills? Just this would be Assembly Bill 23. We're starting with 24. All right. So these are all excellent bills before you today, Mr. Chairman, all three of these. So citizens have a fundamental right to expect that their constitutionally protected religious freedom will be respected by officials at all levels of government, including the right to freely worship unencumbered by the government. Unfortunately, religious liberty has been trampled on by some unelected bureaucrats and elected officials in their response to COVID-19. With facilities like liquor stores and abortion clinics previously recognized by public health departments as essential businesses and being allowed to operate without harassment, while churches and other places of worship were shut down, we must ensure that people's right to
Well, that was a committee hearing in Wisconsin for the Convention of States resolution. We heard lead sponsor Dan Knodel alongside with Kathy Bernier answer questions from the committee. We heard citizens testify. Several COS Wisconsin volunteers came on and talked about how they support Convention of States, the very first and authorizing the very first Article 5 Convention of States to limit the size, scope, and jurisdiction of the federal government. And they were speaking on behalf of 32,000 Wisconsinites who have signed the petition. And volunteers, we heard volunteers talk about the overreach from the EPA, from the Department of Education. We heard volunteers talk about their frustration with federal tyranny that we are seeing. They voiced their frustration about career politicians. They talked about their frustration with the amount of debt that we are seeing, $29 trillion in debt, and saddling the next generation with crippling enormous debt. There was just such amazing testimony that we saw in this hearing. One great golden nugget that I saw was from Daniel Gumber. He spoke on behalf of 2,700 veterans who have signed the petition. That was just a moving moment throughout or in his testimony. And we also heard COS President Mark Meckler, and he spoke directly to the legislators, pleading with them passionately on how Convention of States and Article 5 can be used to fix the problems that we are seeing in the federal government. And it was just so inspiring seeing him, all of the citizen activists that showed up in support of using an Article 5 Convention of States. And stay tuned, because I believe we are going to have Mark come on to speak with us for just a little bit. If we can pull him away, we will hopefully be waiting for him to come with us. But right now we have Catherine Zemanek, Regional Director for Convention of States Action, who oversees Wisconsin. Catherine, how are you doing today?
Thanks, Andrew. It's really great to be with you. I was going to say this morning, but as you can tell, we're now into the afternoon after all the testimony we heard there in Wisconsin. And I want to really highlight something that Mark said in response to one of the questions that the legislators had and some of the testimony. And that was that this will be the biggest constitutional education that the people will ever see once the convention is called. And I respect everyone who testified today. Unfortunately, we could see that there was some misinformation out there,
a lot of it,
about our Constitution, and particularly about Article 5. So I look forward to the time when we can clear that all up when this convention is called.
You know, one of the speaking to that, one that I noticed over and over and over again, which just never seems to go away, is constitutional convention, or CON-CON. Everyone in opposition called it a constitutional convention, when clearly it is not a constitutional convention. It is a convention for the purpose of amending the Constitution. I mean, those are two separate things, but it seems like the JBS or the John Birch Society, they're hell-bent on using that language to basically, I would say, smear what Article 5 really is. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And I would say that for some folks, they're certainly misinformed, but for others, to label it a constitutional convention then sort of places that idea of fear that we're going to somehow rewrite our entire Constitution, rather than it saying what it clearly is, a convention to propose amendments. So it's all about the game of fear that we know our opponents have out there. And what we have to continue to say is, no, this is a conversation for our state legislators to go have that meeting, right, which is the convention, and decide which amendments these great state legislators feel should come out of the convention to go back to the states for ratification.
That's right. And using the fear, unfortunately, fear can be an effective tool, but you know what? We have great patriots out there. We had great supporters that showed up that are not allowing fear to pollute their judgment. And we also have Mark, who's out there, a happy warrior in defense of freedom. So that's amazing. But what I want to know is, I thought we might be having a vote today out of the committee. What is next? Are they going to be voting on it soon, or what's coming up next?
I was actually surprised there was no vote today myself. However, I do know that right now, as we speak, our grassroots and Mark and our sponsor in the Assembly, Representative Dan Canoto, who, by the way, is a great champion for us, are meeting and they're discussing what the next step is. The folks who have been following Convention of States Wisconsin know that we passed out of the Assembly, and that vote was 60-38 last session when we passed. So we have no fears that we would not pass again in the Assembly. As you heard from the majority of the members of this committee, there's a whole lot of support out there for Convention of States resolution to pass. So we're pretty confident that the next step will be this vote passing out of the committee and then on to the floor vote.
Mm-hmm. So I want to ask, what are some of the moments that stood out for you? You mentioned the opposition that we saw. You mentioned the great grassroots supporters, but what are some other moments that stood out for you throughout this hearing?
Sure. You know, it's always very powerful to hear from our veterans. And when those three veterans sat side by side telling their stories, Dave Serta, who serves us very well in Convention of States, he wears many hats. Currently, he's our legislative liaison, told his story about his property and how the federal government took his rights away with that. Dan Gumpert, such a compelling story. And the other gentleman who spoke about his service, I just think that is probably one of the most powerful. And of course, we can't forget about the testimony of our great state director, Joanne Laufenberg. Joanne, she knows her stuff. She's followed this for a long, long time. She came on when Michael Ferris was at a homeschool convention, and she hasn't stopped ever since. She just works so incredibly hard to get more volunteers to come to the team and to educate the folks. So those really were the highlights for me. We had some surprising testimony of folks I didn't know who showed up, and that's always fantastic when they come and they talk in support of the resolution. I think our folks were articulate. They were so smart, knowledgeable. And, you know, what can you say about the opposition? I hope that when we do call the convention, they'll watch and they'll learn.
Yeah, I hope so too. Some of the opposition was very misguided in their comments, unfortunately, and we hope we can turn them around to view or see that Article 5 indeed is the solution as big as the problem, and that it is completely safe, and that the founders granted us this ability to alter the Constitution through this process.
Wasn't it surprising to you to hear the folks who love the Constitution, but when it comes to using Article 5, no, we can't do that. We can't use the Constitution to fix the Constitution, right?
We need to respect and follow the Constitution, but we just can't respect and follow Article 5 of the Constitution. I mean, I think you have to take it all or don't take it all. You can't pick and choose what you want to follow. So I think that really fell flat, that idea that we can't trust Article 5 for some reason. So I love that you pointed that out.
And I'm so glad that our great President Mark Meckler reminded the folks of that too in his testimony. Mark always does a fabulous job. And I know that the folks of Wisconsin are grateful that he came today to give his testimony. So that is what I think folks will take away from this viewing of this is just how strong our side is and the other side's weakness for sure.
I know it was just so great hearing our fearless leader, Mark Meckler, just go out there and just continue to plug away and just dispel all of the myths in just a few minutes. He was able to get it all concisely, just got all the myths out of there. But I also loved the citizens, because they were able to offer just as compelling testimony as Mark was, even though Mark clearly has a greater handle of the particulars of a convention, they still are able to have such a clear and concise support for Article 5. And it's just amazing to see, because this is all generated from we the people. And so it only makes sense that we the people would be there testifying as well. And our supporters showed up in an amazing way, and they are just as knowledgeable. And it just blows me away every time seeing these committee hearings, how knowledgeable our supporters truly are. And it goes to what Mark says all the time, that he trusts the grassroots more than he trusts legislators or people in Congress or other politicians.
Absolutely. They're just wonderful folks. I had the pleasure of being on the ground with the Wisconsin team 2 weeks ago, and I can't tell you what an honor it is to be able to be with the grassroots and to hear their stories. And, you know, it really takes a lot of courage to get up there in front of a microphone, in front of your state legislators, and tell your story. And I think that they are getting stronger all the time. The people who stand up there and speak are articulating what this is all about. You said it best. You said we the people comes from the grassroots. I think even one of the state legislators on the committee today mentioned that this is about the grassroots and the people. So you can't have it both ways. You can't say, hey, we're we the people, but then we the people stand up, the 32,000 plus in Wisconsin, and want this. You can't say they're wrong, because they're not. You know, this is right there in Article 5. And so I am so excited for the next step for Wisconsin. Obviously, we are very confident in what's going to happen in the Assembly, as I mentioned. And when we move this over to the Senate, we've got a whole lot of support over there as well. Our sponsor, you heard from her today, Senator Kathy Bernier, and she's done a whole lot of research. She loves history, loves to tell the story of just why this is so important. And so I look forward to the floor testimony of both of these sponsors when we do get to the full floor for a vote, because I think they're going to articulate just why it's so important for Wisconsin.
I can't wait for that as well. Since we were on the topic of the grassroots and how important they are right now, if there are some supporters right now who are tuning in to this broadcast who maybe don't have a role within Convention of States, or maybe they haven't, they're just like brand new to Article 5 and following what we are trying to accomplish, what would you say they should do right now? What piece of advice would you give them?
Sure, that's a great question. So I think the first thing that you do is you go to conventionofstates.com if you haven't visited our website, and you click on sign the petition. If you've already done that step, go all the way down to the bottom of that page, that first page that comes up, and click on be a leader or volunteer. And that will then take you to a form that you can fill out to join the team in Wisconsin. And although we have a great team in place, we always need new district captains. We need people to make phone calls for us. We need people to put on town halls for us to talk about the Convention of States. We have a great program. We can take you through our COSU, where you can learn all the things you need to be a great volunteer activist for our organization.
I'm so happy that you brought up bringing up COS University and those courses, because what we need to do is we need to get John Birch Society to just go watch some of our COS University courses. Because if they did, they'd find out that all of the myths that they use to drag Article 5 and Convention of States through the mud get easily dispelled just by watching Mark take each myth and break it down. And the one that I think I heard today that was just so funny is Congress is going to take over this process, and Congress is going to insert themselves into the convention, and they will control it. And then it will become a runaway convention. But Professor Robert Nadelson, he also articulately just completely dispels that, because why would the founders, why would they separate Article 5 into two clauses, but then allow for the same outcome where Congress gets to decide in both situations? So it just, stuff like that, just their opposition doesn't seem to follow any logic, it seems.
I'm glad you mentioned Professor Rob Nadelson's book. It's The Law of Article 5 for those folks who want to really look into this in depth on what the court precedent is. You can get it on Amazon, I believe. And last time I looked, I think it was just about $13. It's a great little book. It is a wonderful tool to help people to understand just how Article 5 convention will work. And, I was thinking a lot about this morning because I work in other states and the issues that we're having with state legislators sort of believing what the John Birch Society and the Eagle Forum people spread out there. And really, when you think about politics and history, they're really a science. And so if there's new research in science, you don't just say, oh yeah, but we're just going to look at what the old stuff says. You look at the new research and you say, hey, there is new research. By the way, it looks like we're honored to have our president, Mark Meckler, joining us right now.
Yeah, he's joining us right now. Mark, Are you with us?
We'll see if we can get him on the screen as soon as possible. Oh, he says he's got to jump to Wyoming. Today's a big day for the W states, I'll tell you that, Wyoming and Wisconsin. So I know that Mark has to hop on to testify out there in Wyoming. But to continue our conversation, so the research that Professor Rob Nadelson did clearly lets us know that this can be done in a safe way. Are there some unknowns because we haven't done it before? Sure, absolutely. But I love the way that state legislator said, well, there were probably unknowns when they did the First Amendment to the Constitution. So there are, this is an opportunity for everybody to learn, but we have to look at what the experts are saying, right? And Professor Nadelson is an expert because very few people study Article 5, right? He has studied it and he is the expert on it. And he actually believes that this is the thing to do. He serves as an advisor to us. And I just really want to encourage everyone to get his book, The Law of Article 5.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, go out and get it as soon as possible because you know what? Amazon can't be trusted. They're always trying to ban books. And they seem hell-bent on banning truth. And there is just so much truth in The Law of Article 5 by Professor Rob Nadelson. So definitely go get that. Unfortunately, Mark is not going to be able to join us for this broadcast. But I just want to ask you one more question before we leave. To kind of circle back one more time, what is the next step here in Wisconsin? And to those who are viewing right now, what can they do to contribute to getting Wisconsin becoming the 16th state to pass the COS resolution?
I think that the most important thing for you to do is, again, go to conventionofstates.com and sign the petition. When you do sign the petition, an email goes to your legislators, both in the Assembly and in the Senate, to let them know you're in support. And then click that volunteer button. One of our great volunteers in Wisconsin will reach out to you. They'll explain what is needed right now. And we need the Army. It's the grassroots Army that's going to take this and fix this country. So please join the movement for a convention of states.
Well, thank you so much, Catherine. It was just really a pleasure being able to speak with you for a few moments and being able to pick your brain on what went down in Wisconsin. You're just doing such an amazing job, and I'm so thrilled to be in this fight with you for liberty.
Oh, indeed, Andrew. It's a great pleasure to have you on the team and to be working side by side with the many, many great patriots throughout this country.
Amen to that. Well, it's time for us to go ahead and sign off of this special edition of COS Live. It has been a pleasure being able to watch the testimony and the great patriots that are in Wisconsin right now. If you are sick of DC politics, if you're sick of the federal tyranny that you're seeing, the waste, the abuse, the fraud, the obscene spending and, of course, career politicians, then maybe it's time for you to step up. Maybe it's time for you to join this fight, to lock arms and tell Washington, D.C. that we've had enough. And now it's time to call an Article 5 Convention of States. Well, if you haven't joined a team, or if you haven't signed the petition, please go to www.conventionofstates.com. Sign the petition, and then make sure that you join a local team, because we need grassroots volunteers on the ground who are willing to show up, who are willing to speak their voice, and who are willing to do their part in restoring the republic. So remember, we are only going to be able get to a convention if we have dedicated patriots just like you. If you want to know the person who's going to restore the republic, look in the mirror. All right, we'll see you next time. Bye.